There is something deeply peaceful about a world that never fully reveals itself. Skyrim, that vast frostbitten province of the north, has been explored countless times. Its roads have been walked by millions of players. Its dungeons have been cleared, its mountains climbed, its taverns warmed by firelight on quiet evenings. And yet, tucked within the creases of that enormous world, hidden beneath the surface of what most people ever see, are secrets, encounters, creatures and warriors and spirits who simply wait in the dark, patient as stone, for the rare traveler willing to step off the well-worn path and into the unknown. These are not the dragons circling above the watchtowers, drawing every eye skyward. They are not the Daedric princes making their grand announcements at roadside shrines. They are quieter than that, older, more personal, a frost giant sitting motionless on a frozen throne in a castle buried beneath glacial ice. A pale woman who moves through a haunted crypt like smoke through a keyhole. Two ancient dragons sleeping so still beneath a sacred lake that the water above them has turned to ice. A lone warrior in black armor standing at the edge of a mountain, waiting, not for battle, exactly, but for an ending worthy of everything he has been. This is a script for a quiet night, for headphones and low light and the slow, comfortable heaviness that comes just before sleep. We will move through Skyrim's hidden corners together, unhurried. We will learn the names of the things that wait in the dark. We will tell their stories, because every one of them has one. And by the time we reach the end, I hope you will feel what I feel every time I think about this game. That Skyrim is not just a world you play. It is a world that holds its breath, waiting to see how deeply you are willing to look. Let us begin. Part 1. Volthuriol, the dragon beneath the earth. Deep below the surface of Skyrim, far beneath the Dwemer ruin of Blackreach, there is a dragon. Most players never find him. In fact, most players who spend time in Blackreach, that breathtaking, enormous underground cavern that glows with bioluminescent blue light and stretches further than the eye can easily follow, never even know he exists. They come for a different reason. The main quest sends the Dragonborn here to retrieve an Elder Scroll, and what they find is already staggering. A vast underground civilization, abandoned and silent, lit by the eerie luminescence of enormous hanging lanterns and the strange fungi that cling to the cave walls like stars on a midnight ceiling. Dwemer automatons still patrol the stone walkways. Falmer, the snow elves twisted by centuries of underground blindness into something feral and tragic, lurk in the shadows between ancient structures. The air smells of dust and time. And above it all, hanging at the center of the cavern's great domed ceiling, there is a single enormous orange lantern. It is larger than all the others. It pulses with a slow, warm light that is almost hypnotic, casting long amber shadows across the cavern floor below. Most players look up at it and admire it in passing, the way you admire a chandelier in a cathedral, something beautiful and architectural, part of the atmosphere, not something to be interacted with. But there is a shout, a very specific shout. And if you stand in the open space below that great lantern and unleash it into the air, something extraordinary happens. The shout is unrelenting force. The very first shout the Dragonborn ever learns. 3 words of power, raw and ancient, the voice that moves the world. You aim it upward, at the lantern, and the sound that comes out of you rolls through the cavern like a wave. The lantern rings, and then the ceiling shifts. Because Volthuriol, whose name translates roughly from Dovazul as Dark Overlord Monster, a name that carries in its syllables a certain ancient authority, has been sleeping up there, coiled around the base of that great lantern, motionless for so long that he has become part of the architecture, indistinguishable from the stone and the brass and the fading Dwemer engineering that surrounds him. He is enormous and deeply pigmented, dark as a bruise, his scales absorbing the amber light rather than reflecting it. He has been there, in that exact position, possibly since before the Dwemer disappeared, possibly since before the cavern was sealed. When the shout hits the lantern, Volthuriol wakes. There is no building sequence, no warning. He simply unfolds himself from the ceiling, drops into the air above the cavern floor, and the world below him suddenly feels very small. His wingspan fills the upper space of that enormous chamber. His roar is confined by the cavern walls and comes back as an echo that arrives a half-second after the original sound, doubling it, tripling it, filling the underground world with a resonance that you feel in your chest. Other creatures in Blackreach, the Falmer, the automatons, the wandering Chorus, react with varying degrees of alarm. Some scatter, some do not. It does not particularly matter to Volthuriol, who has been asleep for longer than any of them have existed, and who is now, for the first time in what might be an eternity, awake and furious. The fight itself is extraordinary. Blackreach was not designed as a dragon arena. Its corridors are narrow, its structures are dense, and there is nowhere to simply stand in an open field and trade blows. Volthuriol swoops through the underground space with a confidence that suggests he knows every inch of it, because he does. He has had centuries to learn the shape of his prison. He breathes fire and swoops low over the ancient walkways, scattering the blue mushrooms that line the paths like lanterns. When he lands, the impact shakes dust from the ceiling and sends Falmer fleeing into the shadows. But here is what I keep returning to every time I think about Volthuriol. Not the fight, not the spectacle of a dragon in an underground cavern. What I keep thinking about is what it means that he was there at all. The Dwemer were extraordinary engineers. Their civilization endured for thousands of years, their cities stretching across the continent from Hammerfell to Morrowind, their machines still running millennia after the last Dwemer disappeared in a single, catastrophic moment during the First Era. They built things to last. They built things with purpose. Nothing in a Dwemer ruin is accidental. So, what was Volthuriol doing there? The most likely answer, and the lore never makes this explicit, which is part of what makes it so interesting to think about, is that the Dwemer trapped him, or made an arrangement with him, or built Blackreach around something that was already there, some earlier darkness that predated their construction, and Volthuriol was part of it. There are theories. The Great Lantern he was sleeping on, some scholars of in-game lore note that it is not like the other lanterns in Blackreach. It is larger, more central, almost ceremonial in its placement. Perhaps it was a lure. Perhaps the Dwemer, who famously had no interest in the worship of gods or spirits, but an intense interest in the harnessing of power, had found a way to put a dragon to sleep and keep him sleeping, a living battery of Thuum energy coiled around their most important installation. Or perhaps Volthuriol chose to be there. The dragons of the Elder Scrolls are not simple animals. They are ancient beings of immense intelligence, creatures who think in centuries rather than years, who form alliances and pursue long strategies that mortal beings rarely live long enough to observe from beginning to end. Perhaps Volthuriol struck a bargain with the Dwemer during the height of their civilization, offering his presence and his power in exchange for something we can no longer name. And then the Dwemer disappeared, in an instant. All of them, everywhere, gone. And Volthuriol was left there in the dark, alone, with whatever deal he had made rendered meaningless by the sudden, absolute absence of his partners. Perhaps he decided to sleep, to wait. For what? Even he may not have known. There is something deeply melancholy in that possibility, something that makes his sudden, furious waking feel less like aggression and more like grief. He has been alone in the dark for thousands of years. The world above him has changed beyond recognition. Empires have risen and fallen. The dragons themselves were nearly wiped from the sky by the ancient Nords, then returned to it by the will of Alduin, then threatened with extinction again. And Volthuriol missed all of it. He was down here in his amber-lit cavern, coiled around his lantern, dreaming whatever dragons dream. And then a shout reached him, the Thuum, the voice, the mark of a dragonborn, something he had not heard in lifetimes. And whatever ancient instinct lives in the bones of a dragon responded before he was even fully awake. He rose, he roared, he fought. When the dragonborn defeats him, and they will, because that is how this story ends, Volthuriol's soul passes into you in the way all dragon souls do. A sudden rush of warmth, a sense of something enormous compressing itself into human-shaped space, a word crystallizing in your mind that wasn't there before. He joins the Dragonborn's growing collection of absorbed power, but the Great Lantern still hangs from the ceiling. The cavern still glows with its cold blue light. Blackreach is unchanged, and if you stand there afterward, in the silence of that underground world, the absence of him has a particular texture, the way a room feels different after something large has left it. Volthuriol is not the most powerful dragon in Skyrim. He is not even close to the most powerful entity you can encounter, but he is one of the most atmospheric, one of the most lore-rich, and almost certainly the most hidden. He is a secret that rewards curiosity and punishes assumption, because who would ever think to shout at a ceiling lamp? Someone who looks closely enough, someone who notices that one lantern is different from all the others, someone who cannot walk through a remarkable place without asking why. Those are the people who find Volthurial, and he is worth finding. If you are enjoying this journey through Skyrim's hidden corners, please consider leaving a comment below. Tell me which of these secrets you already knew, and which ones surprised you. And if you want more long, slow explorations of the games and worlds that shaped us, subscribe. It genuinely helps, and I would love to have you along for the next one. Part 2. The Pale Lady of Frostmere Crypt. There are dungeons in Skyrim that feel different from the moment you step inside. Not different in their layout. Many Nordic burial mounds share the same bones, the same long corridors of dressed stone, the same oil lamp flicker, the same half-collapsed passages that force you to find another way. No, what sets certain dungeons apart is harder to name. It is something in the air, a quality of silence that feels inhabited rather than empty. The sense that whatever happened here left a mark that has not faded. Frostmere Crypt is one of those places. You find it in the Pale, that broad, bleak stretch of northern Skyrim between Dawnstar and Whiterun, where the hills are long and treeless and the wind comes off the Sea of Ghosts with enough force to lean against. The crypt entrance is unremarkable, a set of stone steps leading down into the hillside, iron-bracketed torches marking the passage, a heavy wooden door that groans when you push it open. Nothing about the exterior prepares you for what is inside. The quest that brings you here is called the Pale Lady, and it begins not with a mysterious stranger or a dramatic vision, but with something much more mundane: bandits. A group of bandits has taken shelter in Frostmere Crypt, as bandits are wont to do, and two of their number, a man named Roger and a woman named Isa Blackthorn, have apparently had some kind of falling out that resulted in Roger fleeing deeper into the crypt with something he shouldn't have taken. When you enter, the remaining bandits are in a state of barely contained panic. Their journals and scattered notes paint a picture of a group that entered this place with the casual confidence of people who have spent their lives in dangerous locations, and discovered something that shook even them. Whatever Roger took, the remaining bandits want no part of what it has unleashed. You push deeper, past the nervous survivors, past the ones who did not survive, down into the lower reaches of the crypt, where the stonework gives way to something older, and the air changes, grows colder. Not the cold of a drafty underground passage, but a cold that feels purposeful, directional, as though it is coming from somewhere specific and moving toward you with intention. And then you emerge into the place the notes have been calling the Pale Lady's Forest. It is extraordinary. Inside a Nordic burial crypt, underground, beneath a hillside, in a place where there should be nothing but stone and darkness, there is a forest, an actual living forest, or something that resembles one closely enough to stop you in your tracks. Trees rise from the cavern floor, their bark pale as bleached bone, their branches spreading overhead in patterns that block what little light filters through. The ground is carpeted with blue-white frost, the same quality of light as a winter morning just before the sun crests the hills. The trees are not quite like any trees you know from the surface world. They are too pale, too still, too perfectly arranged, as though something planted them with deliberate care. Somewhere in this impossible subterranean woodland, a spirit is waiting. The Pale Lady herself does not announce her arrival with dramatic music or sudden lightning. She drifts between the trees. She is translucent, rendered in the blue-white palette of everything around her, almost invisible against the frost-pale bark of her forest. She is ancient in a way that is difficult to quantify. The Nord burial traditions that created this crypt predate the Second Era, and whatever the Pale Lady is, she seems older than the crypt itself, as though the crypt was built around her, or built to honor a place she already haunted. She is armed. She moves with the unhurried certainty of something that has never needed to hurry. And unlike most enemies in Skyrim, she does not come straight for you. She circles. She uses the trees, drifting between them with a fluency that the trees seem to allow, parting slightly for her, closing behind her, so that tracking her movement becomes its own puzzle. The lore around the Pale Lady is deliberately sparse. which is both a frustration and a strength. What we know, pieced together from the journals in the crypt and the few in-game texts that touch on her, is that she is bound to a specific object, an ancient curved sword that the bandits referred to simply as the Pale Blade. This weapon is what Roger stole. It is what brought him down here in the first place, drawn by something he may not have fully understood, a pull that felt like curiosity, but was probably something older and more dangerous. The blade is hers. Taking it does not simply insult her, it destabilizes her. She cannot rest while it is away from her, and her inability to rest is expressed as what we might call, in the vocabulary of ghost stories, a haunting. The forest around her is not natural in the sense that it grew. It is natural in the sense that it is hers, an extension of her presence, a physical manifestation of her state of mind. When she is at rest, perhaps the forest is at rest too. Perhaps the trees are simply there, pale and still in the underground dark. A beautiful impossibility that no one sees because no one comes here. But when the sword is taken, she wakes. The trees become something else. The forest becomes a place of active wrongness, a place where your compass spins and your sense of direction fails, and the cold gets deeper the further in you go. Roger is in here. You find him, eventually, or you find what is left of him. He did not survive long in the Pale Lady's forest. The sword is near his body, dropped in whatever moment his flight turned into its ending. You pick it up, and she finds you. The fight with the Pale Lady is not the most mechanically complex encounter in Skyrim, but it is one of the most atmospherically complete. The pale forest, the blue cold light, the silent trees, the drifting figure moving between them, everything has been built to create a feeling, and the feeling it creates is deeply specific. It is the feeling of walking somewhere you should not be, of having taken something that belongs to a place rather than a person, and now having to reckon with that place's response. When she is defeated, she does not explode or crumble or give a dramatic death speech. She simply dissipates, the way mist burns off in morning sunlight. There is a moment where she is less solid, and then a moment where she is gone, and the pale forest stands empty and silent, and the cold remains, but it no longer feels directed. You can keep the Pale Blade. It is a genuinely good sword for the level at which you are likely to find it. It staggers enemies and has a cold enchantment that makes it suited to the frost magic builds. But I always find myself thinking about leaving it, about placing it back near where Rajir dropped it, in the middle of that pale underground forest, and walking out of Frostmere Crypt without it. Not because the game rewards this. It does not. There is no mechanic for it, but because the story seems to want it. The Pale Lady was not malevolent. She was not waiting in her forest plotting harm against travelers. She was at rest. Something was taken from her. She pursued it with the only means available to her, with the cold and the trees and the pale light that is all she is made of. And now she is gone, dissipated into a cavern that will stand empty for the rest of the game's timeline, its impossible forest slowly losing whatever quality made it feel alive. There is a lesson in Frostmere Crypt that Skyrim offers without underlining it, without putting a quest marker on it, or giving you a reward for noticing. Some of the things this world considers enemies are simply things that were disturbed. Some of the dungeons that feel hostile were not hostile until someone made them so. The Pale Lady was sleeping, and then someone took her sword. And in the end, what she wanted, all she ever wanted, was to sleep again. Part 3. Kavenel the Tongue and the Tomb that was built for him. There is a specific quality to the ancient Nord ruins of Skyrim that no amount of playing ever fully diminishes. Even after the 100th time descending into a burial mound, even after you know the layout, even after the Draugr have stopped surprising you, there is still something in those long stone corridors, in the carved reliefs of ancient battles, in the whale oil lanterns that have somehow stayed lit for centuries, in the sound of the wind channeled through ventilation shafts, cut by people who died before the Second Era, that commands a quiet kind of respect. Volunruud is older than most. You find it in the tundra south of Dawnstar, and like many of the more interesting secrets in Skyrim, it comes to you through a quest line that initially seems to be about something else entirely. The quest Evil in Waiting begins when you speak to a court wizard in one of Skyrim's holds, and what seems like a straightforward retrieval task, go to an ancient ruin, find a key, come back, turns out to be something considerably more interesting. The key is in Volunruud, and Volunruud has a guardian. His name is Kivenel the Tongue. He was, in life, one of the ancient Nord warriors of the Merethic era, the period before recorded history, before the Dragon War, when the ancient Nords were engaged in the long, complicated process of building a civilization in one of the harshest environments on the continent. The tongue in his name is an honorific. It means he was a user of the Thu'um, one of those rare gifted individuals who could shape reality with the power of their voice. Before the Greybeards formalized the way of the voice into a spiritual discipline, before the Thu'um became something studied in isolation on the peaks of the throat of the world, it was used in war. The ancient Nords used the voice to fight. Kivenel was one of the best of them. He is not particularly large. The ancient Draugr who serve as Skyrim's most common dungeon enemies range from shambling, half-decayed figures that barely threaten a competent adventurer to towering, armor-clad warriors whose mere presence shifts the atmosphere of a room. Kivenel is somewhere in between. He moves with a deliberateness, a controlled precision, that communicates clearly he has not simply been rotting in a tomb for centuries. He has been waiting. There is a difference in the way he holds himself between sleep and patience. He wields two weapons simultaneously, a one-handed sword called Iduj and a war axe called Okin. These are not generic dungeon loot weapons. They are named. They were his in life, and they are buried with him as befits a warrior of his stature, not stored in a chest, not laid on an altar, but held in hands that, though now gray-skinned and desiccated, still maintain the grip of someone who fought with them for a lifetime. The fight begins without ceremony. Kivenel speaks no greeting. He does not monologue. He simply acts, crosses the floor of his burial chamber with a speed that the Draugr you have been fighting your way through do not possess, and opens with a Iduj before you have finished registering that the encounter has started. Okin follows. The two weapons work in combination, his ancient muscle memory guiding them through sequences that were probably killing patterns when the Second Era was still centuries away. He also shouts. This is what distinguishes him, more than his weapons, more than his speed. Kivenel uses disarm, a shout that strips your weapon from your hand with a sharp crack of compressed air. At lower levels, or if you are caught unprepared, this is genuinely dangerous. Your weapon skitters across the stone floor of his burial chamber, and in the moment it takes you to retrieve it or switch to another, Kivenel is already closing the distance. There is something philosophically interesting about fighting an ancient Nord tongue in his own tomb. The Greybeards, when you visit them at High Hrothgar, teach you that the voice is not a weapon, that its use in warfare was a corruption of something sacred, that the ancient way of using the Thu'um was a path of violence that the founders of the monastery deliberately walked away from. Paarthurnax, meditating on the throat of the world for centuries, embodies the idea that power can be chosen against, that the most profound use of strength is restraint. Kivenel represents everything that came before that philosophy. He is the ancient tradition in its uncompromised form, a warrior who shaped his entire existence around the Thu'um, who was great enough to be honored with a named tomb and named weapons and an undead guard that persists through the ages. He is not villainous in the way the word implies moral failure. He is simply of a different time, operating by a different set of values, and those values are now an obstacle between you and an object you need to complete a task. The tomb itself tells a story around him. The carved reliefs on the walls of Volunruud depict battles, not the battles of history that you might recognize from the texts in Skyrim's various libraries, but older conflicts, skirmishes from the period before any of it was written down. There are figures using the voice against enemies. There are enemies that might be men or might be mer, rendered in a style that predates the classical Nord artistic conventions you see in better-known ruins. The whole place has the quality of something that was important to people who have been dead for so long that importance itself has become a kind of archaeology. When Kivenel falls, you can take Iduj and Okin. They are good weapons. Iduj has a soul-trapping enchantment. Okin has a frost enchantment. Neither is the most powerful weapon in the game, but they are both uniquely hers, his, I should say, and carrying them into the rest of the game means carrying a piece of Volunruud with you. The burial chamber falls silent. The other Draugr in the tomb, if any remain, continue their limited patrols. The whale oil lanterns continue their patient burning. And Kvanil the Tongue lies still on the floor of the room he has occupied since before most of the world's current civilization existed. His two named weapons gone, his duty concluded in the only way duties ever truly conclude for the ancient dead of Skyrim, by being overcome by something new. Part 4. Karstag, King of the Frost Giants. There is a castle on the northern coast of Solstheim that the locals call Castle Karstag. Solstheim is the island north of Skyrim that serves as the setting for the Dragonborn DLC, a place of ash wastes and strange cults and mushroom-towered Dunmer settlements, a landscape caught between the familiar snows of Skyrim's northern reaches and the volcanic desolation that arrived when Red Mountain erupted 4 centuries ago. It is a beautiful and melancholy place, and it has secrets of its own, separate from those of the mainland. Castle Karstag is one of the greatest of them. The castle is not, strictly speaking, a castle. It is a glacier. Or rather, it is a glacier into which a structure of extraordinary scale has been carved. Halls and chambers and passages built directly into the blue-white ice of a coastal formation. A place where the architecture and the natural world have fused so completely that it is difficult to say where one ends and the other begins. The Reeklings who occupy the accessible portions of it, those small boar-riding ice goblins who populate much of northern Solstheim, are tiny in its spaces, comic in their blue-painted aggression, completely dwarfed by the scale of the structure they have claimed. That scale was not built for Reeklings. What the castle was built for, or rather who it was built by, is a question that resolves when you find the ruins of Castle Karstag itself, further in, and discover that this was once the domain of a frost giant, not just any frost giant, a king of them, an ancient creature whose existence predates much of what passes for history on Solstheim, who ruled this frozen coast with a sovereignty so complete that someone, the Reeklings perhaps, or some earlier stranger intelligence, built him a palace out of a glacier. Karstag himself is not in the glacier, not at first. The quest line that leads you to him, the pursuit of Karstag, begins when you find his skull in the ruins of the castle, sitting on a throne in a hall that is otherwise empty and deeply cold. The skull is enormous. It could only have belonged to something the size of a modest building. And like many objects in Skyrim and its DLCs, it is possible to pick up, to carry, and to take somewhere specific. That somewhere specific is his summoning altar, a ring of standing stones on the glacial coast not far from the castle, on a frozen promontory overlooking a sea that is itself frozen for much of the year. When you place the skull on the altar and step back, the world seems to pause for a moment. The ice creaks, the stones settle, and then the ground begins to shake. Karstag comes up from below, not from the sea, from the earth itself, from some deep place beneath the ice where he has been resting, or waiting, or simply existing in the way that creatures of extreme age and power sometimes exist, without urgency, without specific purpose, simply persisting, because persisting is what they do. He rises through the ice and stands before you on his coastal promontory, and the word enormous falls somewhat short. He is a giant, not a standard giant, the gentle herders you find tending their mammoths across the tundra of Skyrim, who only become dangerous if provoked. He is a frost giant, a different species entirely, and he is larger than any standard giant by a substantial margin. He is covered in fur and ice, the two so intermingled that it is difficult to say where his coat ends and the frost begins. His face is a mask of ancient cold. He has 3 eyes, 2 where you would expect them, and 1 in the center of his forehead, a detail that the game never explains, but which feels significant, like the memory of something the world used to know about the nature of giants and has since forgotten. The fight with Karstag is considered by many players to be the hardest encounter in all of vanilla Skyrim. This is not hyperbole. He hits with a force that sends even high-level, heavily armored Dragonborn staggering backward. He summons blizzards. He commands the cold in a way that is less magical and more simply authoritative. The cold does what he tells it, because he is a creature of cold, the way that fire is a creature of combustion. He does not control frost so much as he is the local sovereign of it. The developers apparently tuned him to be a genuine challenge for players who have completed most of the game's content. He is the secret final challenge of Dragonborn, a measure of how far you have come, an encounter designed to make even the most powerful Dragonborn reach for every resource, every potion, every tactical advantage available to them. And yet, because this is Skyrim, because the game rewards looking closely, the most interesting thing about Karstag is not his power, it is his story. He ruled this coast. He had a castle, not a metaphorical dominion, but an actual physical structure, carved by unknown hands from a glacier in his honor. Reeklings, who are not known for their organizational sophistication or their architectural ambitions, have been tending his domain in his absence, maintaining, in their limited boar-riding way, a fidelity to a place that their sovereign has been absent from for who knows how long. What is the relationship between frost giants and Reeklings? The game does not say, but there is something in it, something in the fact that the Reeklings are clearly there because of Karstag, that the castle is his castle even in his absence, that his skull on his throne still commands a kind of reverence from creatures who have never met him, and possibly cannot even conceptualize what he was. That suggests a history of genuine connection. Was he a king to them? A god? Something in between? Some category of authority that neither word quite fits? Did Reeklings once ride frost giants the way they now ride boars? Some ancient partnership that has been reduced by centuries of diminishment to its current, smaller form? When Karstag dies, if the Dragonborn can manage it, you receive a power. It is called Summon Karstag, and it allows you, 3 times total, to call him into battle as an ally. The giant who was trying to kill you moments ago becomes a force you can direct. He arrives in a blast of frost and authority, and enemies that were confident a moment ago reconsider their position. There is something magnificent and slightly absurd about this. An ancient frost giant king, a creature who presided over a glacial palace for centuries, reduced to a 3-use ability on the power menu. But there is also something true about it, in the Skyrim way. You absorb Volthurial's soul, you carry Kvenel's weapons, you summon Karstag. The Dragonborn accumulates the past. That is, in some sense, what the Dragonborn is. A living archive of everything they have overcome, everything they have absorbed, everything they have taken from the old world and learned to use. Karstag's promontory is very quiet after the fight. The blizzard dissipates, the ice creaks, settling back into whatever state it considers normal. The standing stones of the summoning altar are unchanged, ancient and patient, doing the long work of standing stones, which is to wait for the next use. And somewhere beneath the coast of Solstheim, the place where Karstag rested for so long is empty now. Part 5. The Udifreikti, a monster that spans 3 games. Not all of Skyrim's hidden encounters are ancient. Some of them are personal. The Udifreikti is a troll, a specific troll, enormous, white-pelted, the color of old snow, with the yellow eyes and the regenerating constitution of its kind. But it is not simply a troll, it is a name, a lineage, a creature whose story begins not in Skyrim, but in 2 earlier games in the Elder Scrolls series, a thread of monstrousness that runs through the franchise like a vein of ore through stone. In the Elder Scrolls 2, Daggerfall, there is a monster mentioned in certain texts, a creature called the Udifreikti, a cold-dwelling troll of unusual size and aggression that haunted the northern wilderness. It was not a memorable encounter in that game, not something most players would have noticed, a name in a bestiary, a footnote. In the Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind's expansion Blood Moon, set, fittingly, on Solstheim, the Udifreikti returns. This time it is an actual encounter, a massive ice wraith ancestor, a specific creature rather than a species, encountered in the frozen north of the island. Players who remembered the Daggerfall reference noticed. It felt like a deliberate callback, a wink from the developers. This creature, this name, appearing again centuries later in the same northern tradition. And then Skyrim arrived, and the Udifreikti appeared for a 3rd time. You find it, or her, as some accounts suggest, in the region around Dawnstar, in a specific location that is easy to miss on the map, an area of frozen coastline where the snow blows in from the sea, and the rocks are salt white, and the sky in winter is a particular shade of gray that feels like the world closing in from above. The Udifreikti is here, waiting in the way that creatures without complex social structures wait, simply occupying a territory, doing troll things, regenerating from every injury with the patient biological confidence of something that has survived everything so far. She is harder than a normal troll, considerably harder. The standard advice for fighting trolls in Skyrim is fire. Trolls regenerate from almost everything, but fire suppresses the regeneration, and a troll that cannot regenerate is just a big, ugly creature with inferior reach and no particular durability. The Udafrikti responds to this logic, but she responds to it from a much higher starting point. Her health is substantially elevated, her attacks hit harder, and she does not seem to be particularly bothered by being on fire, which, when you are hoping that fire will be the solution to your problem, is a disconcerting development. What makes the Udafrikti interesting is not really the fight. The fight is good, but it is good in the way that a well-made obstacle is good. It provides appropriate resistance, it tests the right skills, it ends satisfyingly when you finally prevail. No, what makes the Udafrikti interesting is exactly what I said at the beginning. It is a name that spans 3 games. The Elder Scrolls as a franchise is enormous, internally consistent in ways that most fantasy settings are not, and maintained by a design philosophy that takes its own history seriously. Lore references that appear in one game tend to mean something when they appear in another. The appearance of the Udafrikti in Skyrim, in approximately the same geographic and cultural territory as its earlier appearances on the same northern island or its neighboring coast, is not accidental. Someone at Bethesda decided, at some point during Skyrim's development, that the Udafrikti should still be there, that the monster that haunted the north of the Elder Scrolls world in Daggerfall, that reappeared in Blood Moon, should appear once more in this new rendition of those same northern reaches. It is a small act of continuity, a quiet acknowledgement that this world has a history, that the things in it persist even when the games change, that the monsters of the north are old monsters whose names deserve to be remembered. There is also a more whimsical interpretation, one that the developers seem to have at least partially intended. The Udafrikti is a dynasty. Not one creature, but a line of creatures, each generation carrying the name and the stature and the particular aggression of its forebear. The Udafrikti in Daggerfall was the grandmother, or the great-grandmother, of the one in Blood Moon, who was in turn the ancestor of the one in Skyrim. White-pelted, yellow-eyed, enormous, enduring, still haunting the same cold coast, still exactly as hard to kill as its ancestors were. There is something almost comforting in that. In a world of constantly shifting empires and collapsing dynasties and gods that die and are reborn, and heroes who rise and fall with the turning of eras, the Udafrikti simply continues. It lives in the cold. It eats whatever comes within reach. It regenerates from injuries with cheerful biological efficiency. It passes its territory and its name to its offspring, who pass it to theirs, world without end. In the Dawnstar Sanctuary, the Dark Brotherhood's hidden base in northern Skyrim, there is a specific note about the Udafrikti. The sanctuary is accessible only to Brotherhood members, and contains the headquarters of that shadowy guild in the north. Within it, there is a reference to the creature nearby, acknowledging its presence as a fixture of the local landscape, a thing that has been here for a long time and is expected to remain. Even the Dark Brotherhood knows about the Udafrikti. Even assassins give it a wide berth. When you defeat her, there is no soul absorption, no named weapon to claim, no quest marker to resolve. She simply falls in the snow in her coastal territory, and the world goes on. You may take her pelt, which is warm and useful for alchemy. You may note the location and move on. Or you may stand for a moment at the edge of the frozen sea, looking out at the gray water, thinking about a creature whose family has been here for 4 in-universe centuries that we know of, and probably much longer than that. The cold does not care that she is dead. The coast does not mourn. The snow continues. But somewhere, probably, there is another one, smaller, whiter than white. Learning the territory, the hiding places, the best angles from which to approach the creatures that wander near the coast. Learning to be the Udafrikti. Part 6. The Reaper of the Soul Cairn. There are places in Skyrim's expanded world that are not properly part of the world at all. The Soul Cairn is one of them. It is an oblivion plane, a realm of existence that exists outside of Mundus, outside of the mortal world, maintained by entities whose nature and motivations the mortal mind is not well equipped to understand. You access it through the Dawnguard questline, stepping through a portal that has been constructed in the ancient ruins of Castle Volkihar, crossing a threshold from the ordinary darkness of a vampire lord's fortress into something else entirely. The soul cairn is where souls go when they are trapped in soul gems. Not all souls, not the souls that pass through Arcae's cycle, through the gates of Aetherius, through the ordinary process of dying in a world that has gods who tend to such transitions. The soul cairn receives the souls that are taken before that process can complete, souls captured in gems by enchanters and court wizards, and dragonborns building better weapons, souls that are used as fuel, as currency, as raw material for the enchanting table. Those souls come here. It is a vast gray-purple space. The sky, if you can call it a sky, is the color of a bruise, streaked with arcane energy that moves too slowly to be lightning and too purposefully to be weather. The ground is flat and featureless except for the ideal master's crystalline structures that rise here and there like abstract monuments to nothing that human aesthetics would call beautiful. The souls that occupy this place wander. They are not quite themselves anymore. They speak in fragments, in the scattered vocabulary of people who have been here too long, which for souls in the soul cairn means more than long. It means indefinitely, without the possibility of rest that death in the ordinary world eventually offers. There is a version of the soul cairn that you can explore almost entirely without encountering its most powerful resident. The Reaper is optional. He is not part of the main Dawnguard quest. He is a secret within a secret, accessible only if you find his 3 Reaper gem fragments and bring them to his altar. His altar is in a shadowed part of the cairn, further from the main paths, past the wraith lights that serve as the plane's only illumination. It is built from the same gray stone as everything else in this realm, but its architecture is deliberately funerary, arched, heavy, the design of something built to mark an ending. The altar has 3 indentations, 3 spaces that perfectly match the fragments you have been collecting. When all 3 are placed, the Reaper arrives. He is not subtle. He is a massive armored figure. But the armor is not worn the way armor is worn by a warrior who put it on before a battle. It seems grown, or attached, or perhaps he was born in it. He carries a weapon of extraordinary scale. He is the definition of a guardian, in its oldest, least metaphorical sense. A thing placed between something precious, or something dangerous, and the world outside, there to prevent unauthorized passage in either direction. What exactly does the Reaper guard? The question is more interesting than it might first appear. The soul cairn is the property of the ideal masters, those ancient entities that the human text in the DLC refers to with capitalized gravity but never fully explains. The ideal masters began, apparently, as mortal magic users, sorcerers of the first era who became so obsessed with soul magic that they themselves underwent a kind of transcendence, leaving their mortal forms behind and becoming something that now exists as pure will and pure purpose in this plane they have constructed. They are the architects of the soul cairn. The souls in it are, in a sense, their collection. The Reaper is their enforcer, their jailer, the being they set to walk the gray spaces of their realm and ensure that whatever they want kept in stays in, and whatever they want kept out stays out. He guards, specifically the deepest part of the cairn, the place where the oldest souls are, the place where the ideal masters keep what they value most, which is not gold or power in the conventional sense, but rarity, old souls, powerful souls, souls that have been trapped for so long that they have become something different from what they were. The fight with the Reaper is genuinely challenging in ways that feel specific to the soul cairn. He is physically overwhelming, but what makes him different from a simple, oversized warrior is his relationship to the environment. He is not a creature who happens to be in the soul cairn. He is a creature of the soul cairn, and the soul cairn responds to him. The realm's energy fortifies him. The shadows deepen around him when he moves through them. He is home, in a way that the Dragonborn is definitively not, and that home advantage translates into mechanical reality. Soul gem fragments are everywhere in the cairn. They fall from the Mistmen and Bonemen and Wrathmen that patrol the plane, and they function as a kind of currency for the things you need there. But against the Reaper, they are not enough. You cannot bypass him. He does not negotiate. His purpose is singular, and has been singular since whatever moment the ideal masters put him here, and that moment predates the current age by enough time to make the concept of patience almost meaningless. When the Reaper falls, and eventually, with the right preparation and enough persistence, he falls, you take his greatsword. It is called the Reaper's Greatsword. It is not a nuanced name, but nuance was never the Reaper's particular strength, and the weapon is devastating in the way that weapons belonging to extremely powerful beings often are. It hits very hard, and carries an enchantment that drains the health of what it strikes, an enchantment that feels appropriate for a weapon that has been used in a realm of stolen souls. But the soul cairn does not change when the Reaper is gone. The wandering souls still wander. The ideal masters still inhabit their crystal structures, still indifferent to the Dragonborn's presence in the way that entities of sufficient fur are indifferent to most things. The gray sky still pulses with its arcane bruise light. The Reaper's altar is empty of its fragments, and somewhere in the deepest part of the cairn, the old souls remain. No one is guarding them now. Perhaps, in a realm of stolen time and stolen lives, that matters. Perhaps some of them, freed of the guardian that kept them in place, begin the long process of dissolution that leads eventually to whatever peace is available to souls in a place like this. Perhaps the ideal masters, noticing the absence of their enforcer, do not care. Perhaps guardians are replaceable to beings that have all the time that has ever existed. Or perhaps the Reaper simply continues his patrol in some form not visible to mortal eyes. Because a being defined entirely by its purpose does not stop being that purpose simply because it was defeated. Perhaps purpose at that scale is harder to kill than the creature embodying it. The soul cairn does not answer questions like that. It simply continues, eternal and gray and full of the sound of wandering souls, under a sky that never changes, in a realm that time does not quite reach. Part 7. Naaslarum and Voslarum, the twin dragons of the Forgotten Vale. There is a valley on Solstheim, or rather reachable through Solstheim, that almost no one sees. The Forgotten Vale is the hidden homeland of the Snow Elves, or what remains of it. You reach it through a series of portals built by the ancient Falmer before their fall, walking through curtains of magical light that deposit you in a place that feels entirely disconnected from the rest of the game world. It is enclosed by mountain walls so sheer and complete that the valley seems less like a geographical feature and more like something cupped in enormous hands. A place protected rather than simply isolated, sheltered rather than merely remote. The Vale is breathtaking in a way that feels quietly painful once you understand its context. Its architecture, the graceful arching structures of the ancient snow elves in their pre-corruption form, is elegant in a way that sets it apart from every other building style in Skyrim and its DLCs. These are not the crude stone arrangements of Nordic burial mounds or the functional severity of Dwemer design. They are beautiful in the original sense, the sense that suggests the people who built them thought beauty was worth expending effort on, that a building should give something to the person looking at it beyond shelter and utility. The Snow Elves built this valley as a sanctuary, when their surface civilization was collapsing under pressure from the ancient Nords, whose revenge for the Night of Tears was systematic and total and shows no signs of stopping. A faction of them retreated here. They brought their art and their architecture and their way of life and tried to preserve it behind mountain walls and magical barriers, and for a time they succeeded. The Forgotten Vale is their success made physical, a perfect, preserved, completely inaccessible version of what Snow Elf civilization looked like at its height. And beneath its central lake, sleeping under the ice, there are two dragons, Naaslarum and Voslarum. The names are Dovazul, dragon language, and they share a construction that suggests a pairing, not siblings exactly, not mirror images, but something like partners or complements. Two halves of something that functions better together than separately. They were here before the Snow Elves built their sanctuary, possibly before the mountains that cup the valley were shaped into their current form. They are ancient in a way that most dragons in Skyrim, with their centuries of burial mound sleep, do not quite achieve. They have been here, beneath the ice of this sacred lake, for longer than the Snow Elves occupied the vale above them. The encounter is triggered when you cross the frozen lake in the heart of the valley. There is nothing to suggest danger. The ice is solid and clear, the pale gray white of glacial water frozen in stillness. And through it, if you look at precisely the right angle, in precisely the right light, you can see shapes. Long shapes, vast and dark, lying on the lake bed with the patient immobility of things that are waiting rather than dead. But you do not necessarily notice them before you step onto the ice. You are likely looking ahead, toward the distant shore, toward the next objective marker in the Vale's complex. You are walking across a frozen lake, which in Skyrim is completely normal and unremarkable, and you are thinking about what comes next. And then the ice under your feet begins to crack. Not the way ice cracks when it is too thin to support weight, that particular creak of structural failure. This is different. The cracks radiate from 2 points simultaneously, 2 points that are separated by a substantial distance across the lake's surface, 2 points that are directly above 2 shapes that are no longer still. The ice does not simply break. It shatters upward, exploding in sheets and columns as 2 enormous bodies detach themselves from the lake bed and drive toward the surface with a speed that the ice cannot withstand. Na'aslaram erupts from the ice on your left. Voslaram erupts on your right. The columns of water and frozen spray are enormous, and in the instant that they both emerge, there is a second of absolutely spectacular visual chaos. 2 dragons rising simultaneously from a frozen lake, ice and water and spray and the sheer displacement of air that 2 creatures of that mass moving that fast creates. For a moment, the Forgotten Vale's quiet beauty is completely replaced by something much louder. They are frost dragons. The cold that permeates the Vale has been in their scales for however long they have been sleeping beneath the lake, and they breathe it back into the world as they circle above the ice. The frost attacks of 2 ancient dragons, combining and overlapping in ways that make the temperature of the air around you genuinely hostile. They do not take turns. They do not seem to coordinate in any explicit way. But they also do not get in each other's way, which suggests a familiarity so deep that it has become instinctive. They have fought together before, long before. Why are they here? This is the question that the Dawnguard DLC raises clearly, and answers only obliquely. The Snow Elves built the Forgotten Vale as a sanctuary for their civilization. They built it with magical barriers and hidden entrances specifically to keep the outside world out. And within it, they coexisted with 2 ancient dragons who had been resting in the lake at the valley's heart since before the elves arrived. The relationship between the ancient Snow Elves and Naslaram and Voslaram must have been complex. The Snow Elves were sophisticated enough to maintain the relationship without simply being prey, but what that relationship actually looked like, what agreement governed the coexistence, what the dragons received in exchange for their presence in the Vale, the game does not say. What the game does show, through the physical fact of their presence here, is that the Forgotten Vale was not simply an architectural refuge. It was a protected space, a space that had guardians, ancient ones, sleeping in the cold water at its center, maintaining through their presence alone a deterrent against whatever might otherwise threaten the valley's isolation. The Snow Elves who built here knew the dragons were there. They built their sanctuary around them. In some sense, the dragons in the Vale were parts of the same defensive structure, a layered protection that required both the architecture and the sleeping giants in the lake to function as intended. The Snow Elves are gone now. The Dwemer destroyed them with deliberate, systematic thoroughness, blinding them with poison, enslaving them, transforming them over countless generations into the Falmer you have been fighting your way through the ruins of their former world. What is left of them in any recognizable form is almost nothing. Knight Paladin Gelibor, one of the final quest objectives of the Dawnguard storyline, is possibly the last uncorrupted Snow Elf alive, a figure who has been waiting in the Vale for his brother to return from a pilgrimage that ended thousands of years ago, who has kept faith with a version of Snow Elf civilization that no longer exists anywhere else. And the 2 dragons in the lake have kept sleeping, long after the people whose sanctuary they guarded ceased to exist. That is a specific kind of loneliness, a specific kind of faithfulness without an object. They were placed here, or chose to be here, in relation to something, and that something has been gone for so long that the gap in the world where it was has closed over, the way a scar closes over a wound, smooth and total. The Forgotten Vale is still here, its architecture still stands, but the civilization that gave it meaning is reduced to one patient old elf in a ruined way shrine, and the distant descendants of his corrupted brother, who can no longer see the beauty around them. Na Slarum and Voslarum were sleeping through all of that. They will not wake unless something steps onto the ice above them. They have no way of knowing that everything has changed. When they emerge in their column of frozen spray and fury, they are doing what they were doing in the era when snow elf warriors still walked the Vale's paths, defending the territory, responding to intrusion with the full weight of what they are. When you defeat them, and defeating 2 frost dragons simultaneously on a partially frozen lake, that their emergence has made structurally unreliable, is one of the more dramatic combat scenarios the Dawnguard DLC offers. Their souls pass into you in the usual way. The ice refreezes over the empty cavities their departure has left in the lake bed. The Forgotten Vale returns to silence, the last defenders of a lost civilization, sleeping in cold water for longer than the civilization that built the walls around them, waking only to find that the person who crossed their lake was not a threat to the Snow Elves, but the latest chapter in a story that the Snow Elves are no longer present to care about. There is something in that which deserves acknowledgement. Not celebration exactly, not simple mourning either, just acknowledgement. They were faithful. Right to the end, they were faithful. Part 8. The Ebony Warrior and what he is really asking for. At level 80, a stranger walks up to you. He is a Redguard. That alone is notable in Skyrim, where Redguards are travelers and merchants, people passing through rather than people belonging to the province's deep history. He is dressed in armor that is entirely black, not dark, not gray, not the dark-tempered metal of standard ebony gear, but deeply, completely black, in a way that catches no light at all, as though the armor is not simply black, but has decided to actively refuse reflection. He stands with the stillness of someone who has been standing still for a very long time, and has come to a kind of peace with it. He will approach you wherever you are. He seeks you out specifically. He knows who you are, the Dragonborn, the person who absorbed Alduin's soul, the person who has cleared more ancient tombs and defeated more powerful entities than anyone else currently walking the roads of this province. He knows your reputation in the way that warriors who pay attention to such things know reputations. Not as legend or rumor, but as data, assessed and considered and used to make a decision. His request is simple. He would like you to kill him. Not in those words exactly. He phrases it as a challenge. Would you face him in honorable combat? Would you meet him at a specific location in the Velothi Mountains? Is the Dragonborn willing to give him the death he is looking for? And that last phrase is the important one, the death he is looking for. Not the death he is offering, not a challenge with uncertain outcome. He already knows how this ends. He is asking you to be the instrument of an ending that he has, after presumably a very long time of living and fighting and accumulating power, decided he needs. The Ebony Warrior is not a villain. He is not an enemy in any meaningful moral sense. He is a man who has done everything. He has traveled Tamriel. He has mastered every school of magic that a Redguard who dedicated his entire life to the martial arts would bother to master. He wields a massive ebony greatsword and wears armor that the in-game lore suggests is among the best non-Daedric protection available. He has his own shouts. He uses the Thu'um in combat, another indication that his life has ranged very far across the landscape of possibility and picked up things that most people never encounter. He has his own magic. He has his own reflection, a conjured copy of himself that he can deploy in the middle of a fight to create tactical complexity. He is everything that a person who has spent an entire lifetime becoming the best at fighting becomes. And he is, quietly, completely done. The Redguard people of Tamriel have a particular cultural relationship with death in battle. Hammerfell's warrior tradition, the sword saints of the Alikir, the Ashieba who fight the undead, the Ansei who were said to shape blades from pure soul, treats the manner of dying as inseparable from the honor of a life. To die in bed, fading away from age or illness, is not a failure exactly, but it is not the death that a warrior's life builds toward. The death a warrior builds toward is a confrontation with something worthy, something that requires everything you have, and the willingness to give everything you have in that moment, because you have already given everything you had to getting there. The Ebony Warrior has spent his entire life becoming the best possible version of a warrior. He has done so thoroughly enough that there is nothing left to challenge him. He is level capped, Or rather, he is tuned to provide a real challenge to a dragonborn who is as powerful as it is possible to become through normal play. He is the game's acknowledgement, implicit and slightly melancholy, that at some point, the hero becomes the strongest thing in the room, every room. And that achievement, which is the goal of every leveling system in every RPG ever made, turns out to have a particular flavor. It is lonely. There is no one who can give him what he needs anymore. No dungeon deep enough, no creature powerful enough, no warrior skilled enough to provide the genuine danger that gives a fight its meaning. The only person he has found, after however long he has been looking, is the Dragonborn, the person who absorbed Alduin's soul, who has fought their way through every plane of oblivion and ancient ruin and Daedric puzzle available to them. If the Dragonborn cannot end his life in honorable combat, nothing can, and he wants to go to Sovngarde. This is the detail that makes the Ebony Warrior's request specific, rather than merely philosophically interesting. Sovngarde is the Nordic afterlife, the Hall of Valor, where Shore's feast is always running, and the honored dead who entered through its mist gate spend eternity in the company of their equals, feasting and fighting and singing. It is the reward that Nordic culture places at the end of a life well fought. But, and this is the crucial detail, you cannot enter Sovngarde unless you are Nordic, or unless you have lived by Nordic values so completely that the distinction becomes meaningless, or unless you die in a way that Sovngarde's gate recognizes as appropriate. The Ebony Warrior is not Nordic. He is Redguard. He worships the Nordic gods in the way that a man who has spent a lifetime learning every martial tradition available to him worships the gods that best reflect what he has chosen to become. He has earned, by his own reckoning, the right to stand in Shore's hall. But the gate will not open for someone who simply died. It opens for the honorably slain. He needs to be killed by someone worthy of killing him. And then his admission to Sovngarde depends on whether the Nordic afterlife, and the entity of Shore who presides over it, recognizes that the death was what it was. A warrior's death, a good death, the ending that a life of that quality deserves. The fight itself is everything the setup promises. He uses his shouts without hesitation. He manages distance with the competence of someone who has been doing this for decades. He switches between offense and defense with a fluency that suggests he has fought enough genuinely dangerous opponents that adapting to what a specific enemy is doing has become natural, automatic, the way breathing is natural. His conjured copy is genuinely confusing in the heat of combat, appearing at the worst moments, demanding your attention while the original is already moving. He is, in the most straightforward sense, the hardest human enemy in the game. And when he falls, when the Dragonborn finally lands the killing blow, in a mountain pass in the Velothi Range with the wind coming off the peaks and the sky the gray-blue of a Skyrim afternoon, he does not give a death speech. He does not shout a final curse or proclaim a final truth. He simply falls. The way a man falls when he has been waiting a very long time to fall, with something that you might, if you are generous, and if the light is right, interpret as relief. His armor is available to take. It is exceptional. The Ebony Greatsword is exceptional. In purely mechanical terms, the Ebony Warrior is a loot source and a challenge rating and an achievement unlocked. But I do not think that is what he is. I think he is Skyrim's most honest statement about power and its limits. A secret boss placed at the maximum possible level, not to test how strong you have become, but to ask what you are going to do with that strength. He came looking for you because you were the only option left. The most powerful person in the world still needed something that the second most powerful person in the world could give. He needed an ending. You gave him one. Part 9. Red Eagle, Hero of the Reach. The Reach is not a settled place. It is the westernmost hold of Skyrim, the territory that butts up against the Druidoc Mountains on the Hammerfell border. A landscape of deep gorges and high cliffs and the ruins of Reachman culture stacked on top of each other, like geological strata. Each era's stones pressed down by the weight of the next one. The Forsworn who haunt the Reach in Skyrim's present day are not invaders. They are, as any careful reading of the available lore makes clear, the people who were there first, whose ancestors built the stone circles and the standing sites, and the crudely effective architecture that dots the cliff faces of the Western Highland. The Nords displaced them. The Forsworn are fighting, with the ferocity of people who have been fighting for so long that ferocity has become identity to get back what they understand as theirs. Centuries before this conflict hardened into its current form, the Reach had a king. His name was Faulan. The history calls him Red Eagle, a name he earned in the wars of his reign, and his story is one of the most complete and most tragic in Skyrim's rich tradition of annotated tragedy. You find it in a book called The Legend of Red Eagle, available in various locations around the Reach and in certain hold libraries, and it reads like the skeleton of an epic, compressed, factual in its framework, clearly derived from an oral tradition that had more flesh on it than the written version preserves. The story goes like this. Fiolan was king of the Reach, in an era when the ancient Reach culture was facing systematic destruction from outside forces. The specifics shift depending on the version of the text, but the structure is consistent. His people were losing. The places they held sacred were being taken. The old ways were being erased by a new order that had no interest in preserving what it displaced. And Fiolan, refusing to accept the end of everything his people were, made a bargain. He did not make this bargain with a Daedric prince in the way that most Elder Scrolls bargains are made, a supplicant at a shrine, an offering made, terms negotiated. Red Eagle's bargain was with something older and less formal. The shamans of the Reach in his era practiced a blood magic that predated the organized Daedric cults, a tradition that worked with powers whose names are not preserved in any text because naming them was never the point. The power was not in the name, the power was in the blood. Fiolan spilled his own blood. He accepted whatever terms were offered, and he became something that was still Faulan, but was also more than Faulan, a warrior of supernatural capability whose sword became an extension of his will, rather than simply a piece of shaped metal, who fought with a ferocity that the histories describe in the vocabulary of forces of nature rather than human beings. He pushed back. He won victories that should not have been possible. He recovered ground that had seemed permanently lost, and then he died. But his sword remained. Red Eagle's Bane, later called Red Eagle's Fury, depending on which version you find it in, is sealed with him in Rebel's Cairn, the burial mound on the Red Eagle Redoubt in the Reach. To find it, you need the book, which gives you a clue. To access the burial properly, you need to place a specific type of fire salts on the pedestal at the cairn's entrance, an offering that echoes the original bargain's requirements. The fire salts are not particularly difficult to find. They are available from any alchemist, but the requirement to bring them is the game's way of marking this as more than a simple dungeon. It is a ritual. You are performing an acknowledgement. Inside Rebel's Cairn, after the usual atmospheric descent through Nordic stonework, you find Red Eagle's spirit. He is not a mindless draugr. He is a shade, a preserved consciousness, anchored to his burial place by the same bargain that gave him his power in life, now twisted into a kind of undeath that is distinctly different from the soul gems and enchanting undeath of Skyrim's more common spirits. He moves with the memory of the warrior he was. He uses the sword, and he is genuinely hostile, not in the way of something that simply attacks anything that enters its territory, but in the way of something that has been here a very long time, in a space that has not seen a visitor in longer than it can accurately track, and that does not know what you want or whether you are a threat. The fight honors what the lore establishes about him. He is powerful. The sword has fire enchantment that connects to the blood-fire imagery of his legend. He is fast, which feels right for a king who fought battles against larger forces and won through speed and decisiveness rather than weight of numbers. He is not invincible. The bargain gave him power, not permanence, but he is enough of a challenge that the encounter feels like a conclusion to the story the book set up, rather than a footnote. What you are taking from him, if you take it, is not simply a weapon. It is the artifact of his bargain, the physical object through which the power he obtained in life was channeled and focused. Carrying it means carrying something that has been drinking the blood of Fiolan's legacy for centuries. The game treats it as loot. The lore treats it as a relic. But what I keep returning to when I think about Red Eagle is the specific kind of tragedy his story represents. He made his bargain to save his people. He fought his wars and won his victories, and died the death of a warrior king. And his people did not survive anyway, not as an independent culture, not in any form he would recognize. The Forsworn of Skyrim's present day are descendant from the people he fought for. They share the reach, they share the old ways, they share the specific grievance of dispossession, but they are not the people he saved. They are the people who kept existing in the places that could not be held by anyone's bargain, and who are still fighting the war that Fowlin lost millennia ago. His bargain bought time. It did not buy permanence. And so, he rests in his cairn with his sword and the hollow victory of a king who gave everything and received what kings who give everything tend to receive: a good death, a monument, and an outcome he did not fully control. The Reach is still contested. It has always been contested. Red Eagle's bane is still powerful. The fire still burns in its enchantment. And somewhere in the stone of Rebel's cairn, the spirit of Fowlin rests again after his long duty, in the silence of a burial mound surrounded by mountains that are still, after all these centuries, exactly as contested as they were when he was alive to contest them. Part 10. 8 smaller secrets. Not all of Skyrim's hidden encounters announce themselves as grand. Some of the most memorable are the smallest, the encounters you almost missed, that have stayed with you precisely because they asked so little of the world's attention and received so little in return. Here are 8 of the ones that deserve to be said aloud. Anice's cabin on a quiet lakeshore south of Riverwood. There is a small cabin. It is the kind of cabin you walk past 100 times. Modest wood construction, a small garden with some planted crops, a water barrel by the door. An old woman named Anice comes out to meet you when you approach. She is pleasant, if guarded. She mentions her sister. She mentions the peaceful life she leads by the lake. She seems like exactly the kind of NPC who is set dressing. Atmospheric detail, a face to the inhabited landscape. Go back after she leaves. Go inside. Find the trapdoor to the cellar. The cellar is a laboratory, not the kitchen witch kind, not the humble alchemy setup of a woman who makes herbal remedies. A proper necromancer's workspace. Skulls, black soul gems, ingredients that belong to a specific and deliberate magical practice that the College of Winterhold would consider advanced, and that most of Skyrim would consider horrifying. Letters in the cellar mention her sister. The sister is apparently also a witch. The pleasant old woman by the lake is a practitioner of serious dark magic who has been living here, in her quiet cabin, doing her quiet work, completely unnoticed by Riverwood, a short walk away. When you come back up from the cellar, and she is still there, if she is still there, she attacks. Immediately, and with no pretense. The pleasant old woman is gone, replaced by something that has decided the pretense is not worth maintaining. She is not particularly powerful, but the cabin, and the cellar, and the discarded pleasantness have done something to the encounter that pure combat power never could. This is how practitioners of dark magic survive in a province that would burn them if it knew. They look like someone's grandmother, they live by a pretty lake, and they keep the cellar door locked. Ingol's Shade. In Ingol Barrow, east of Windhelm, on the coast of Eastmarch, you can find the spirit of Ingol himself, one of the sons of Ysgramor, the first companions, the legendary 500 who sailed south from Atmora and built Nordic civilization in Tamriel. The history of Ingol is one of the oldest stories in Nordic oral tradition. He was sailing with his father and his companions in a fleet making the crossing from Atmora to Skyrim, and in the crossing, the Sea of Ghosts, which is exactly as dangerous as it sounds, caught his ship. There was a storm, or something that the survivors called a storm, and Ingol's vessel did not make the crossing. He drowned within sight of the shore that he had been sailing toward. His father Ysgramor survived. His brother Jorg survived. Ingol did not, and Ysgramor, in grief, built the barrow on the eastern coast as his son's tomb, and laid him there with the full honors of a warrior's burial, as close to the sea that had taken him as the land allowed. The spirit you encounter in the barrow's final chamber is Ingol's Shade, his preserved presence, held to the place by the depth of his burial and the age of the mourning that placed him here. He does not speak. He simply fights, with the efficiency of a warrior from an era when the 500 were actively carving a civilization out of a hostile landscape, and efficiency was survival. He uses a sword. He is fast. He is harder than most shades of comparable lore status. When he is defeated, the barrow is simply empty. No quest resolves. No achievement unlocks. You are standing in the tomb of one of the founding figures of Nordic culture, in a place that has been here since before the Second Era. And the only thing that has changed is that the spirit of a drowned son is no longer holding this space. There is no reward for this that the game names as a reward. But Ingol's Shade is Skyrim acknowledging that some of its history is just history, that some of the old names are still there, in the dark, doing what the old names do, regardless of whether any living person comes to witness it. Veleshk sign in the midden, the beneath the College of Winterhold dungeon that most students probably know not to go into, and therefore exactly where curious students go, there is a summoning circle. Frost-scarred stone floor, ritual markings worn almost smooth by whatever happened here, and 4 gauntleted hands frozen in place around it. 4 students, fused to the summoning circle in a moment of magical catastrophe, their bodies reduced to hands by whatever went wrong. They were trying to summon a Dremora, a Daedric entity, something powerful and dangerous and manageable, presumably, if you know what you are doing. They did not know what they were doing. What they got was Velech Sain. He is a Dremora, but he is a pirate Dremora, which is a combination the Elder Scrolls universe does not owe you any explanation for, but provides anyway. He has a treasure map. He has been trapped in this summoning circle for years. He is absolutely delighted to see you, with the specific delight of something that has been imprisoned and senses an opportunity. He will, if released, give you the treasure map and vanish, or you can fight him here, in the circle, which he cannot leave. The treasure is real. The map leads to a buried chest in Winterhold. It is not spectacular, but it is real, and the transaction you made to get it was, you released a Daedric pirate from a magical prison. This is one of those decisions that Skyrim presents with a perfect poker face. Velech Sain is the midden's quietly excellent secret, not a combat challenge, but a moral comedy. A creature that should be terrifying is instead charming in exactly the way that pirates in fiction tend to be charming, with obvious self-interest and sufficient charm that you overlook it. The 4 petrified students are still there after he leaves, their hands still reaching. Whatever bargain they made, they did not get to participate in this particular resolution. Arundel. In Ingvild, a cave on a small island off the northern coast of Eastmarch, there is a necromancer named Arundel. He is not a hidden boss in the dramatic sense. He is a dungeon boss. You find him at the end of the cave, and you fight him, and the fight is not particularly distinguished by Skyrim standards. What is distinguished is his journals. Arundel was, before he came here, a court wizard of some standing in Dawnstar. He had a career, he had colleagues, he had a reputation, presumably, that involved the legitimate applications of magical study, and he had an obsession that eventually became impossible to hide. He was attracted to the female ghosts that haunted Dawnstar's streets, not in a metaphorical sense, not in the way that people are attracted to mystery or the uncanny. In the specific literal sense that eventually got him fired, driven out, publicly shamed, and relocated to a remote island cave where he could pursue his interests without the ongoing awkwardness of having neighbors who knew what those interests were. His journals document the progression, the early fascination, the first experiments with binding spirits to physical forms, the gradually escalating scope of his project, which by the time the Dragonborn arrives has resulted in a cave full of Draugr thralls and spectral conjurations, who are entirely non-consensual participants in whatever Arundel has been doing in this cave. He is one of Skyrim's most uncomfortable secrets, not because the game does anything explicit. It doesn't, and it doesn't need to. The journals do the work, in the specific and effective way that Bethesda's environmental storytelling does its best work, by showing you the documentation of a person's full moral collapse, step by step, in their own handwriting, and letting you arrive at your own conclusions about what you are looking at. The fight, when it comes, feels less like combat and more like a necessary conclusion to the worst field notes you have ever read. The old orc on one of Skyrim's roads, not always the same road because he wanders, there is an old orc. He is standing at his campfire. He has a tent, badly pitched. He has the equipment of a warrior who has been one for a long time. He greets you without hostility and makes his situation clear in the direct, unadorned manner that the Orsimer tend to prefer when they have decided something. He is old, Too old to die in battle the way an orc is supposed to die, his body is failing on him. The Code of Malakath, the orc's spiritual tradition that governs everything from marriage rites to the correct way to resolve disputes, holds that an orc warrior should die with weapon in hand, fighting something worthy. He has outlived all the worthy opponents he found in his prime. He cannot find a fight at his age that challenges him properly. He is asking the Dragonborn, who is, by this point in the game, the most dangerous thing most people on Skyrim's roads have ever encountered, for exactly the same thing the Ebony Warrior asks for, except without the elaborate buildup. He just wants a good death. Right now. If the Dragonborn is willing, you can refuse. You can walk away and leave him at his campfire, and he will wander back into Skyrim's landscape, and you will probably not see him again. Or you can give him what he asked for. If you do, the fight is brief. He is old. He is skilled, but his body is old, and a Dragonborn at the level where this encounter tends to occur is genuinely overwhelming for anyone not specifically designed as a challenge encounter. He fights with everything he has. He dies. There is no reward, no quest completion marker, no note in your journal, just a dead old orc on the side of a Skyrim road, in the company of his tent and his campfire, and the cold that is coming in off whatever body of water is nearest. It is one of the most affecting things in the game. Not because the writing is exceptional, it is good, but it is brief. But because the thing it is about is something we actually know. The specific sadness of outliving what you were. The specific dignity of knowing what you need and asking for it directly. He asked for it. You gave it. Taran Dreth, in the game's base content, there is a legendary vampire hunter named Valeriani. She is referenced in a book called The Vampire Assassin, available in various locations, which tells the story of a person who dedicated their life to hunting the undead and became legendary for it. By the time the book's events are complete, she has retired, the legend made and closed. And then, if you are a vampire in the Dawnguard DLC, and you have built your reputation as a vampire, a man named Taran Dreth tracks you down. He is Valeriani's student. He learned vampire hunting from the legendary master herself, which should be impressive except for the quality of his judgment, which is terrible. He hunts you specifically because killing a dragonborn vampire, if that is what you have chosen to be, would be the ultimate validation of his career. He is ambitious in the specific way that ambitious people who have trained under legends tend to be ambitious, convinced that the technique they have been taught is sufficient for anything, not having yet encountered the thing for which it is not sufficient. He has been writing a book about himself, The Vampire Assassin 2, Return of the Vampire Assassin, in spirit, if not in title, a sequel to the legend he was trained in, with himself as the protagonist. He tells you this. He explains his reasoning. He has considered the narrative shape of his career and decided that this is the chapter where he becomes the hero. The Dragonborn kills him. It is entirely possible to feel bad about it. He was not a bad person. He was a skilled fighter, with poor situational awareness and an overinflated sense of what his training had prepared him for. The tragedy of Taran Dreth is not his death, but the gap between what he understood about himself and what was actually true, and the fact that Skyrim lets you read that gap in a few lines of dialogue before the fight begins. Chief Yamar's The Quest of the Cursed Tribe begins with an orc chief who has displeased Malakath, the Daedric prince of the Orsimer. Chief Yamar's of Largashbur Stronghold is the subject of Malakath's displeasure. The stronghold is under attack by giants, a condition the orcs attribute to divine punishment, and Yamar's needs to make it right by going to Fallowstone Cave and defeating the giant there. He does not want to do this himself. This is the problem. He is the chief. He should, by every rule of orcish tradition, be the first one into any fight. He asks you to come with him, ostensibly as backup. He offers to pay you to do most of the actual fighting. Inside Fallowstone Cave, if you allow him to, he will make a choice that Malakath finds completely unforgivable. He will try to hire you to kill the giant for him and take credit for it. He will stand behind you and let you fight and intend to walk out as though he was the one who handled the problem. Malakath's response is to direct you, through his enchanted weapon, to kill Yamar's. The encounter is brief. Yamar's fights you, and he is not particularly difficult. But what makes it memorable is the moral clarity of what Malakath has done. An orc chief who will not fight is not simply a bad leader in orcish culture. He is a categorical failure, a person who has abandoned the defining attribute of the role they hold. Malakath does not make speeches about this. He simply provides the means by which the problem corrects itself, and steps back, and lets the correction proceed. There is something almost Confucian in it, in the most unromantic possible sense. A thing in the wrong role is a problem. The problem resolves when the thing is removed from the role. Chief Yamars was not a chief. He is not anymore. Kyne's Sacred Trials in the Eldergleam Sanctuary. The grove of the great tree that predates recorded history and glows with golden light that is genuinely beautiful in Skyrim's sometimes austere visual palette. A spirit named Froki Whetted Blade gives you a task. Kill specific animals, not any animals. Specific animals in specific locations that are spirits rather than ordinary creatures, harder, larger, more aggressive versions of Skyrim's natural wildlife. Animals that have been touched by Kyne, the goddess of the wind and storm and the hunt, and that she has set in specific places as tests. A special bear, a special wolf, a special skeever, a special mud crab. The mud crab is important. You will face it and recognize that it is, by any reasonable standard, the single most insulting thing Kyne has ever asked of a hunter. It is a mud crab. It is large. It is harder than a normal mud crab. It is still, at its core, a mud crab, and defeating it as part of a sacred spiritual test requires a commitment to not laughing, that Froki's questline tests rather severely. But the sacred trials are, in their unglamorous and slightly ridiculous way, one of Skyrim's quieter and more genuine pieces of world-building. Kyne is not a quest hub deity. She does not have a Grand Daedric questline or a named artifact that requires you to descend into an oblivion plane and fight your way to her throne. She is a goddess of the natural world, the Nord goddess of storm and hunt and the sky, and her tests are correspondingly natural, not grand, not spectacular. She wants you to kill a bear, a wolf, a ram, a mud crab. She wants you to go to the places those things live and approach them as a hunter and deal with them as a hunter. The rewards are modest. A few shout charges, a hunter's ability to call animals to your side. The point is the act, the acknowledgement that hunting is sacred, that the natural world is sacred, that the mud crab, ridiculous as it is part of Kyne's creation and has been placed specifically as a test and deserves to be taken seriously as one. There is a version of this questline where you go through it with full ironic detachment and feel vaguely condescended to. And there is a version where you do it in the spirit it was intended, where you walk through Skyrim's wilderness to each location and fight each spirit animal, and understand, by the end, why a goddess whose domain is the natural world would not set her tests in dungeons or oblivion plains or ancient ruins. She set them in her own territory, because that is where the sacred things live. Part 11. The Road's Edge, ambient mysteries you were never meant to understand. Not every secret encounter in Skyrim is a fight. Some of the most memorable things this game has to offer are encounters that begin with curiosity, proceed through atmosphere, and end without resolution. Mysteries that are meant to remain mysteries. Presence that is meant to remain unexplained. Late at night, on the roads of Skyrim, you may meet a rider. The horse and its rider move at a steady pace, headed in a consistent direction, never varying their route regardless of the time or the weather or who else is on the road. The rider is luminous in the particular way that Skyrim's spirits are luminous, that blue-white translucence that catches moonlight in a way no living thing does. He rides without urgency. He rides without looking at you, without acknowledging your presence, without giving any indication that he is aware of the world around him at all. He is simply moving through the night, along a road, toward a destination. The destination is Hamvir's Rest. It is a small, ancient Nord burial site in the tundra north of Whiterun. Not a particularly large or famous ruin, not a dungeon with a questline attached, just a ring of old gravestones in a frost-gray landscape that marks the resting place of people whose names the world has stopped recording. If you follow the rider all the way to Hamvir's Rest, he rides straight through the gate and stops in the center of the burial ground and simply ceases to move. He stands there until morning, when he disappears. And then the next night, if the game decides it is time, he appears again on some road in Skyrim, riding his same route. Who is he? The game has no answer. There is no note in Hamvir's Rest that identifies a headless horseman. There is no quest that involves him. He appears in no book. He has no dialogue. His horse has no name. He is simply there, a rider without a head, going home every night, persistent as any natural feature of the landscape, as unremarkable in the logic of Skyrim's world as a deer in a meadow or a hawk overhead. This is one of the things Skyrim does that I find most admirable. The Headless Horseman does not need to be explained. He does not need to resolve into a quest line. His presence is sufficient. A rider on a night road, making his circuit, going home to his grave. The scariness of it, and it is genuinely eerie the first time, the way the best ghost stories are eerie, does not require any elaboration to sustain itself. He is there because the world is the kind of world where a thing like that can simply be there, unexplained, permanent, waiting for the next traveler to notice. Near Broken Tower, Redoubt in the Reach, there is a giant. He is standing over a mammoth. The mammoth is dead. The giant is not doing anything except standing there, and if you approach without attacking, he continues not doing anything except standing there. He is mourning. You can see it in the way he stands, not the aggressive posture of a giant defending territory or responding to threat, but the still, hunched posture of something in grief. He is not threatening. He is not hostile unless you make him hostile. He will stand there for days. If you return after time has passed, he may still be there, or he may have moved in a slow circuit around the area, coming back. The mammoth's body, decaying slowly in the frost, is the fixed point. He orbits it. Giants and mammoths share something in Skyrim's ecology that most players think of as a flavor detail and is actually an essential piece of the world's design. They are partners. Not in the way that a rider and a horse are partners, not in the hierarchical structure of a domesticated relationship, but in the mutualistic structure of two species that evolved alongside each other and developed a genuine connection across that evolution. The mammoths protect the camps from certain threats by their sheer mass. The giants herd the mammoths, direct their movement, and, this is the part the game shows without explaining, apparently form bonds with specific animals that have the texture of something we would call friendship, if the species involved were more verbal about it. This giant lost his friend. Nothing in the game acknowledges this as significant. No NPC in a nearby hold will tell you about the grieving giant at Broken Tower Redoubt. No book describes it. It is simply there. A small, specific sadness in a landscape full of much louder ones, and it persists regardless of whether anyone notices. But someone at Bethesda noticed. Someone built this scene and placed it, and made the giant's aggression conditional on being attacked rather than automatic. Someone decided that a giant should be capable of grief, and that the grief should look exactly like this, standing over the dead, not doing much else, not knowing what to do next. There are abandoned campsites on Skyrim's mountain passes where the last occupant is clearly visible in the details. A tent, partially erected, abandoned before completion. A bedroll unfurled but unused. A fire pit with wood arranged but never lit. Supplies in a pack that was set down and never picked up again. Whatever happened, happened quickly. Not the gradual accumulation of departure, but the sudden cessation of arrival. Someone was building a camp and did not finish building it. You will never know why. You will never find a body, or a note, or a quest marker pointing to the story. The mountain is cold and the pass is exposed and the fire was never lit, and that is all there is. Skyrim is full of these unresolvable details. These ambient stories that have no endings because they were never designed to have endings. They were designed to make the world feel like a world. A place where things happen that have nothing to do with the protagonist, where the landscape holds events that no one with your specific combination of abilities and timing can witness from the beginning. You always arrive in the middle. You always leave before something else has started. The world was here before you and will continue after, and the unlit campfire on the mountain pass is one of the game's quietest ways of telling you that. Part 12. Closing, a world that holds its breath. We have been traveling for a while now, you and I, through Blackreach's impossible underground sun and the pale forest of Frostmere Crypt, through the precise, patient violence of Kvanil's tomb and the frozen thunder of Karstag's coastal emergence, through a monster lineage that spans 3 games, a prison of stolen souls and its single enormous warden, two dragons faithfully sleeping beneath the ice of a lost civilization's sacred lake. Through a warrior asking for the only thing he cannot give himself, and a king whose bargain bought time but not victory, and all the smaller, quieter things that populate the edges of the road. What I keep noticing, the through line in all of this, the thing that connects Volthuriol and the old orc, and the grieving giant and red eagle, and the headless horseman making his nightly circuit, is faithfulness. Not fidelity to any particular ideal or allegiance, though that is sometimes present too. Just the simpler and more fundamental thing, being in the place you were when whatever ended, ended. Staying, continuing, doing the work or the waiting or the mourning, without an audience, without a reward, without any indication that anyone was ever going to notice. Volthuriol coiled around the amber lantern in Blackreach's ceiling for 4,000 years or thereabouts, in a darkness that had nothing particularly sustaining in it except the darkness itself. Nias Larum and Vos Larum settled to the bottom of the Forgotten Vales Lake, after the snow elf civilization they were guarding ceased to exist, and kept sleeping because sleeping was what they were there to do. The grieving giant stood over his mammoth and did not leave. Not because leaving was forbidden, but because leaving was, apparently, not what you did. The Pale Lady of Frostmere Crypt did not expand beyond her forest, did not claim the surface world, did not pursue vengeance beyond the recovery of what had been taken. She was faithful to her specific space and her specific loss. The old orc was faithful to the code that said a warrior's death should be a warrior's death, and he found his way to it. Red Eagle kept faith with his people past his death, anchored to the reach in a cairn on a hill that still overlooks contested territory. Skyrim is full of things that are faithful past the point where faithfulness made any practical sense. And the game, without speeches, without underlining, without quest markers pointing at it, seems to think this is worth noticing. Worth honoring in the only way games know how to honor things, which is by making it real, making it findable, making it there for anyone willing to go looking. There is a version of Skyrim that most people play. The main quest, the guilds, the civil war, the companions, the college, the thieves guild, and the dark brotherhood, and the farms, and the forges, and the markets of the 9 hold capitals. It is a good game, that version, a great one. There is nothing wrong with playing it and feeling satisfied. But there is also this version. The version where you shout at a ceiling lamp out of curiosity. The version where you follow the headless horseman to see where he goes. The version where you bring fire salts to a cairn in the Reach because a book told you to, and wait to see what happens. The version where you stand over a dead mammoth with a giant because it seemed rude to walk away. This version is harder to find. It requires a specific kind of attention, not skill-based attention, not the attention of someone trying to optimize or complete, but the attention of someone who is willing to be surprised, who treats the world as a place that might have things in it that are not on the official list, not because the developers were hiding them maliciously, but because some things are placed in a world simply because the world deserves to have them there. That is what I love most about Skyrim, after all this time. Not the main quest, good as it is, not the voiced dialogue, or the radiant systems, or the crafting progression. It is this. A team of people, more than a decade ago, decided to put a dragon under a ceiling lamp in an underground city and gave him a name in dragon language that means something, and made the shout that finds him the most basic and universal shout in the game, and then, and this is the part I cannot get over, said nothing about it, put it in the world and left it there. Trusted that eventually someone would shout at a ceiling and find him and understand. They were right. We have been right here, in this quiet, for the whole journey. The fire is probably low now. The night is further along than when we started. There may be nothing left between you and sleep, except the slow decompression of a long and satisfying exploration. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for the comments you leave. I read every one, and the places and times you share from are always extraordinary. If this helped you sleep, if it helped you see Skyrim with a slightly different quality of attention, then it did what it was supposed to do. Subscribe if you want more of this. There are more worlds to explore, more hidden corners, more things that are faithful past the point of practical sense, waiting for someone to notice them. Rest well. The fire in the hearth is burning slow and steady. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Justo Wild NPC, exploring the worlds that shaped us, one quiet hour at a time. Part 13. The Forge Master of Ironbind Barrow. There are Nord burial mounds that double as something harder to name than a tomb. Ironbind Barrow, in the tundra south of Winterhold, where the land levels out between the mountain ridges and the wind has room to build speed, is one of these. Its exterior is a standard set of stone steps and iron fittings and the faint smell of cold stone that distinguishes every buried ruin in the province. Two treasure hunters have made camp outside, a woman named Salma and a man named BMJ, and if you ask them, they will tell you with the easy confidence of people who have found interesting places before that this particular barrow holds something remarkable. They want to explore it together. Safety in numbers. The numbers do not help. What Ironbind Barrow actually contains, at its deepest point, is a word wall, one of those ancient carvings that hold a fragment of the Thu'um. And between you and that word wall, the Forge Master. He is an animate suit of armor. Not a person in armor, not a Daedric entity wearing metal as a convenient form, but a suit of ancient Nordic iron mail that has achieved something like independent existence through what the lore of this world calls a mechanical or enchantment process, so old and particular to its place that calling it either of those things feels inadequate. He is enormous. He moves with the deliberate weight of something that weighs what it weighs and is not pretending otherwise. His joints creak with the kind of creak that suggests not age or disrepair, but sheer mass, the sound of significant metal in motion. What the Forge Master guards is the accumulated expertise of whoever built this barrow. Ironbind's deepest chamber is not a tomb in the conventional sense. It is a workshop, ancient smithing equipment preserved by the same quality of Dwemer-adjacent engineering that keeps whale oil lanterns burning in ruins sealed for centuries, fills the space around the word wall. The Nords who were buried here, or who were interred here against their will, or who built this place and never intended to leave, were people who worked metal, not simply fighters who happened to carry swords, but craftspeople of sufficient distinction that their tools and their workspace were preserved as carefully as their bodies. The Forge Master is their guardian, built from their work and animated by whatever tradition of Nordic enchantment predated the College of Winterhold and the formal schools of magic. He is armor that has decided it has a purpose, which is to stand between the knowledge contained in this place and anyone who approaches it without having demonstrated sufficient reason to be there. The two treasure hunters from outside, Salma and BMJ, do not meet this threshold. This is why their story ends inside rather than outside, and why the Dragonborn, if they are paying attention to the signs, chooses not to be surprised by that. The fight with the Forge Master is one of those encounters that rewards patience. He is large and hits hard, but he is not quick. And his weakness, which the dungeon hints at if you read the environment rather than simply pushing forward, is fire. The Forge Master, despite being built from metal, despite being designed to withstand the threats that an ancient Nordic craftsman considered worth guarding against, did not anticipate everything. Fire works. It works in the specific way it works on things that contain machinery. It does not simply deal heat damage, but disrupts whatever keeps the animation moving, interrupts the enchantment at its source. When he falls, and he falls heavily, with a crash that shakes the barrow, the chamber goes quiet in the particular way it does when the primary threat has been removed. The word wall is accessible. The ancient smithing equipment is accessible. The bodies of the craftspeople are accessible, in the way that the bodies of ancient Nord dead are always accessible. Frozen in whatever position they occupied when they stopped, preserved by cold and enchantment and the particular quality of time that exists in sealed spaces below ground. There is a specific detail about the Forge Master that most players miss, absorbed as they are by the combat and the word wall after it. The suit of armor he constitutes is not a uniform design. It incorporates pieces of several different styles, several different eras of Nordic smithing, as though it was assembled from whatever was best available in the workshop, whatever the craftspeople judged most worthy of the work it was going to do. He is, in some sense, a collaboration, the final project of a group of people who were very good at making things, who decided that the last thing they made should be the thing that guarded everything they had ever made. He is a masterwork, just not the kind anyone usually means by that. Part 14. The Caller of Felglow Keep. There are antagonists in Skyrim who are not given names in the quest log. You are told what they are called, the Caller, and you are told why you need to find them. They have something that belongs to the College of Winterhold, and the rest of their story is available only if you look at the environment they have built around themselves and read it the way environments are always available to be read. Felglow Keep is a fortress in the tundra east of Whiterun. Before the Caller and her people took it, it was probably just another ancient stone structure in various states of collapse, the kind of place that nobody particularly wanted, and that therefore nobody particularly defended. Mages who need a place to work often end up in these ruins by simple logic. You need space, privacy, and walls that are unlikely to attract visitors. Abandoned keeps are all of these things. What the Caller has done with Felglow Keep is turn it into a research station, a functional, extensive, apparently well-provisioned magical laboratory where serious work is being done on questions the College of Winterhold would prefer were not asked outside of official supervised settings. The mages working here are former college students and faculty, people who left or were expelled, or left in the specific manner that very committed researchers sometimes leave institutions that have started to find their methods uncomfortable. She is at the deepest point of the keep. Past her colleagues, past the prison cells where she is holding the college mages who came looking for the stolen books, past the alchemy and enchanting stations that line the corridors, through the room with the caged vampires that she is apparently studying in a way that the college would have opinions about. In her inner sanctum, surrounded by the evidence of serious magical work, performed without the oversight that the college requires, and she apparently does not want. The Caller is a conjuration specialist. More specifically, she is a reanimation specialist, a necromancer in the functional sense, even if she has never used that title for herself, a person whose research concerns the persistence of soul and consciousness beyond the death of the body. The stolen books she has are part of this research. They contain information the college has in its restricted section, for reasons the college would probably articulate as ethical concerns, but which anyone looking at Felglow Keep's research logs would recognize as competitive jealousy. She is not a sympathetic villain in the way that some of Skyrim's antagonists are sympathetic. She has imprisoned people. She has done things to the vampires in those cages that suggest her research ethics are flexible. But she is also clearly very good at what she does, clearly motivated by genuine intellectual drive, rather than simple cruelty or power acquisition, and the research notes scattered through her keep describe questions that are genuinely interesting, if pursued through means that reasonable people would object to. She gives you a choice, the books or a fight. She does not want the books badly enough to die for them, or she does not want the fight enough to start it if there is another option. She is a researcher. She wants to keep researching. Dead researchers do not complete their work, and the books are worth more to her as intellectual tools than as causes worth dying for. If you accept the exchange, walk out with the books and let her keep her freedom to continue doing what she does in her keep. She does not thank you. She does not offer future cooperation. She simply turns back to her work, with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who had a problem and now does not have it anymore. The transaction is complete. Her research continues. If you fight her, she is genuinely difficult. Her conjuration abilities mean she is never alone, and her personal combat power is substantial on top of the summoned support. She has spent enough time in this keep, with this specific arrangement of space and enchanted objects, that she fights with the confidence of someone who has thought about this contingency. The thing about the Caller that stays with me is the absence of her name. She is identified only by her function, the person who calls things, the conjurer, the one who summons. And this anonymity is not accidental. She exists at the college's edge, in the category of people the college knows about, and has chosen to deal with through institutional silence rather than direct confrontation. She has a name somewhere. People she trained with in her college years know what it is. But in the context of the quest and the role she plays in it, she is simply the Caller, and everything personal about her is in the research notes on the tables and the decisions visible in the infrastructure of Felglow Keep. She is one of Skyrim's small masterclasses in environmental storytelling, a character whose depth lives entirely in what you find rather than what you are told. Part 15. The Dragon Priest, Volsung. and the shore at the edge of the world, at the northernmost accessible point on Skyrim's map, where the coast of the Sea of Ghosts becomes a salt-white shelf of rock at the very edge of the playable world, there is a ruin called Volskiga. The name means, in the dragon language, shadowed throne. It is fitting. Volskiga sits on a prominence above the sea, its ancient stones dark against the gray sky of the far north. A structure so remote that the nearest settlement, Dragonbridge to the south, is a significant walk even by the standards of a world where significant walks are routine. No road leads directly to Volskiga. No NPC in the game's populated areas gives you a quest to go there. You find it by exploring the northern coastline far past the point where most exploration logic suggests you should have turned around. Inside, there is a word wall, the words of the Shout Throw voice. And at the ruin's highest point, sealed in an elaborate chamber at the end of a long puzzle door sequence, there is a dragon priest. His name is Volsung. The dragon priests of Skyrim, of which there are 8 named priests whose masks represent the pinnacle of their ancient order, are not uniform in their characteristics. Each one served a different dragon during the height of the dragon cult, and each one's mask carries enchantments that reflect, however obliquely, the nature of that service and the domain of the dragon they represented. Volsung's mask grants a 20% price discount on all goods, water breathing, and the ability to carry 20 more pounds of equipment. These are, on their face, the enchantments of a merchant, a traveler, someone whose purview was commerce and movement, rather than war or magic. This is a strange set of abilities for a warrior priest of the dragon cult. The dragon cult was not known for its commercial acumen. Dragon priests were intermediaries between draconic power and human supplication, administrators of a theocratic empire built on tribute and worship. They were not merchants, unless, and this is the interpretation that makes Volskiga's remote coastal location coherent, the specific dragon Volsung served had a territory that included the sea trade. Skyrim has a northern coast. The Sea of Ghosts is one of the most important bodies of water in Tamriel's history, the passage through which Ysgramor's fleet sailed from Atmora, the sea routes that connected Skyrim's northern holds to each other and to Solstheim and the continent's broader trading network. If a dragon in the Merethic era wanted to control a territory with both martial and economic significance, controlling the northern sea route would do it. The harbor tolls, the tribute from trading vessels, the power to grant or deny passage through waters that everyone who moved goods along the coast needed to use. Volsung was the priest of that dragon. The commercial enchantments on his mask are not an anomaly, but a record, the faded impression of an ancient administrative domain, the powers he needed to govern a territory where commerce and the sea were the currency of authority. The fight with Volsung is among the most atmospheric of the dragon priest encounters, which is saying something given that all of them are atmospheric by design. He is at the top of Volskiga, in a chamber that opens partially toward the sky, with the sea visible below and the wind audible even here. He uses powerful magic. The dragon priests are formidable spellcasters as well as melee combatants, and Volsung has a particular affinity for the kinds of shout-adjacent power that his ancient training in this specific remote location has sustained and deepened over the centuries. His staff fires projectiles that drain magicka and stamina. The mask, once claimed, is excellent in the ways its enchantments imply. On a merchant character, a character who moves goods and talks people down, and has built a Skyrim run around commerce rather than combat, it is one of the best pieces of headgear available. On any character, the water breathing is quietly useful in a province that has as much cold water as Skyrim does. But Volsung himself is what I keep coming back to, the priest of the sea trade dragon, sealed in his remote coastal ruin, maintaining his vigil above waters that were once his master's domain and are now simply geography. No merchant ships pass under Volskiga anymore to pay their tribute. No harbor tolls are collected in the name of a dragon whose bones are somewhere further south, probably in a burial mound, waiting for an awakening that no longer has anything to promise him. The Sea of Ghosts simply moves, cold and gray and indifferent, the way it has moved for every era of Skyrim's history. And at the edge of the world, above it, in a sealed chamber at the top of a ruin called Shadowed Throne, something in ancient robes and a mask remembers what authority once looked like from this particular promontory. Part 16. Mirak's earliest victims, and the architecture of addiction. Before we talk about Mirak himself, and we should talk about him, because he is the Dragonborn DLC's central figure, and one of Skyrim's most completely realized antagonists, we should talk about the people. Solstheim, when you arrive, has a problem. The island's human population, the Nords who have lived there since its settlement, the Dunmer refugees who have been rebuilding their lives on its ash-covered southern reaches since Red Mountain's eruption, is engaged in an activity that looks like labor and is actually something much worse. They are building a shrine. Specifically, they are gathering stone and placing it in prescribed configurations around certain focal points across the island, working with the mechanical efficiency of people who have found the most important task they have ever been given, who are not sure why they are doing it or when they will be allowed to stop, but who cannot conceive of doing anything else. They cannot be stopped by talking to them. They respond to questionings with the glazed, distant answers of people who are technically present, but functionally somewhere else. If you attack them, they defend themselves and then return to their work. They do not eat. They do not sleep. They work. This is Mirak's influence, operating through the stones, the black standing stones called Allmaker stones that dot Solstheim's landscape, and that have been sites of Skal spiritual practice for as long as the Skal have existed. He has corrupted them. He has made them into transmitters, broadcasting his will across the island, compelling everyone whose hand has touched one into a labor that serves his purposes without their consent. The architecture of what Mirak has done to Solstheim is extraordinary in its cruelty and its elegance simultaneously. He does not need guards. He does not need chains. He does not need a force of arms to compel a population's cooperation. He needs their hands on his stones, and the rest follows automatically because the stones are now his, because his will, maintained across whatever distance separates Apocrypha from the mortal world, is sufficient to override the individual wills of every person on the island. Mirak himself is sealed in Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's oblivion realm, the endless library of forbidden knowledge, where every text ever written exists on shelves that go further than vision and time can follow. He was sent there by Vachlok, the dragon priest who defeated him in the ancient conflict that literally tore Solstheim from the Skyrim mainland. He has been there for thousands of years. He has been reading, and everything he has read, in a library that contains every piece of knowledge that has ever existed, including knowledge of how to extend one's reach across the barrier between Oblivion and the mortal world, he has turned toward one specific project: getting out. The enslaved construction crews of Solstheim are not building a shrine in the decorative sense. They are building a mechanism. The configurations of stone they are laying, in patterns that look random from the ground but resolve into something coherent from above, are a tool for the same purpose as the word walls the ancient Nords carved across Skyrim. They are encoding power. They are encoding specifically Mirak's power, concentrating it in the physical landscape of the island he has chosen as his entry point, building the infrastructure he needs to make the crossing from Apocrypha to Mundus without the usual requirements. The Dragonborn's arrival disrupts this, not because the Dragonborn knows immediately what is happening. The initial arrival on Solstheim is bewildering in the best possible way. The visual language of the ash wastes and the Dunmer architecture and the specific quality of light in a place that is neither quite Skyrim nor quite anywhere else establishing something different immediately. The disruption happens because Mirak knows about the Dragonborn. He knows there is another one. And another Dragonborn is the only thing in the mortal world that is a genuine complication for his plans. He sends cultists before the Dragonborn even arrives on the island, masked figures in Raven Rock who approach with the direct hostility of people who have been given a specific assignment. Kill this person. Make sure this person does not become a problem. The cultists are not particularly difficult, but their appearance before any context has been established is one of Skyrim's cleaner pieces of dramatic economy. You are already a problem before you know what the problem is. Mirak, when you finally face him, is everything the game has built him to be. He is the first Dragonborn. He predates you by an era so remote that the records of his original existence are fragmentary, preserved mostly in the in-game book Dragonborn, which describes a figure of enormous power and vanity who chose Hermaeus Mora's knowledge seize over his own people's freedom, and paid the price for that choice while continuing to benefit from it, because that is the nature of the bargain Mora offers. The knowledge is real, and the price is real, and you get to experience both simultaneously for the rest of an existence that Mora can extend as long as his patience holds. The Dragonborn DLC's combat climax is a three-phase fight in Apocrypha's shifting tentacle and bookpile landscape, where Miraak absorbs the souls of the dragons you have already defeated to heal himself and demonstrate exactly what being the first Dragonborn means in terms of raw capability. He is faster than you expect. He uses shouts with a fluency that reflects millennia of practice. He can turn ethereal, becoming untargetable while repositioning. He has clearly spent a very long time in a library that contains, among other things, everything ever written about how to win a fight. The final resolution, Hermaeus Mora, intervening in the way that Daedric princes intervene when they have decided the transaction is complete, is one of those moments where the game delivers something that lands harder than the combat that preceded it. Mora kills Miraak, not you. Mora kills him because Miraak was always going to be expendable once a replacement Dragonborn was available, because that is what Hermaeus Mora does. He accumulates knowledge and he discards containers once better containers become available. And the Dragonborn who just demonstrated the capacity to challenge the first Dragonborn is a more interesting acquisition than the one who has been sitting in his library for 3,000 years. And Miraak, in his last moment, in the gray-green light of Apocrypha, acknowledges it. Not with acceptance exactly, but with the particular bitterness of someone who was the smartest person in every room until he found a room where that stopped mattering. He was the first one. He was Olmo the worst version. The version that chose knowledge over humanity, that enslaved rather than protected, that made Mora's bargain fully and paid it fully, and received everything promised and discovered, at the end, that the full ledger had a final line he had not read carefully enough. The Dragonborn absorbs his soul, his power becomes yours, his thousands of years of accumulated knowledge compressed into the same transfer that happens with every dragon you have ever killed, passes in an instant. And Hermaeus Mora speaks. He is satisfied. The new Dragonborn is a better investment. Solstheim is free. The enslaved workers released from their compulsion, the Allmaker stones purified. The shrine was never finished. The mechanism for Miraak's crossing was never completed. And somewhere in Apocrypha, among the impossible stacks and the tentacles and the text that goes on forever in every direction, the space where Miraak used to sit is empty. All those books, all that time, not quite enough. These additional sections bring the complete script to its full length. What follows is the closing of the journey, the same quiet place we always return to at the end of a night like this. A brief note on time. Before we move to the closing reflections, it is worth pausing for a moment on something that connects all these encounters in a way that the game itself never makes explicit. Every hidden boss in Skyrim exists at a different point in the province's enormous timeline. Volthuriol predates the Dragon War. Naslarum and Voslarum predate the Snow Elf civilization that built the Forgotten Vale around them. The Forge Master of Ironbind Barrow dates to the First Era smithing traditions. Karstag ruled his coastal domain in an era before Solstheim had any settled human population at all. The Reaper of the Soul Cairn is so ancient that the ideal masters who placed him there have themselves transcended ordinary time. And Miraak, the first Dragonborn, predates recorded history as most of Tamriel understands it. What the game asks of you, in finding and engaging each of these, is to move through time without moving, to stand in the Fourth Era, the era of Skyrim's present day, the era of the Dragonborn and the Civil War and the Alduin Crisis, and reach back through the layers of what came before. Each hidden encounter is an archaeological discovery. Each one restores a piece of the world's actual depth, not just how far it extends geographically, but how far it extends backward. The province is not just large, it is old. And the things that have been here the longest are the ones waiting furthest from the road. Part 17. The Galder brothers, and what greed does to a legacy. There is a family in Skyrim's ancient history that does not get a monument. No ruin is named for them collectively. No saga preserves their story in flattering terms. What remains of them is dispersed across 3 dungeons in separate corners of the province, 3 men who died badly and who cannot rest properly, and a quest that the game delivers to you in fragments because fragments are all that survive. Galder was a wizard. This is how the story begins, and the word wizard here carries more weight than it does in the contemporary context of the College of Winterhold and its organized schools of study. In the First Era, in the period when the Archmage Shalador was still alive and building his legendary structures and the knowledge of magic was concentrated in individuals rather than institutions, a wizard of significant power was a figure of genuine social authority. Galder was one of those figures. He served the High King, advised rulers, accumulated knowledge and influence, and the specific kind of reputation that meant when Galder said something, people in power listened. He had 3 sons, Jarik, Mikrul, and Sigdis. The amulet Galder wore was the physical expression of his power, not a decorative piece, not a symbol, but an actual object through which his magical capacity was focused and amplified. It made him what he was. Without it, he was still skilled, still learned, but the extraordinary level of power that made him valuable to rulers would have diminished to something more ordinary. The amulet was his in the deepest sense. It was built for him, designed for his specific connection to the magical forces of Mundus, calibrated to his particular way of working with those forces. His sons killed him for it. They did not plan it together, or at least the record suggests they did not. Each of them simply reached, independently, the same conclusion, that the amulet was the key to their father's power, and that their father was the obstacle between them and the amulet, and that the obstacle could be removed. Jirik, Mikrul, and Sigdis, each acting from their own combination of ambition and resentment, and the specific delusion that they deserved the thing their father had built a lifetime to earn, murdered Goldor and divided the amulet into 3 pieces. The Archmage Geirmund hunted them down. This is documented in the in-game book Lost Legends, which presents the story as a legend because by Skyrim's present day, the full account has been suppressed, sealed by the order of the High King, removed from the histories, the names of the Galder sons erased from the record. The reason for this suppression is never fully explained. The most persuasive theory, reading between the lines of what the game offers, is that the story was too useful as a cautionary tale and too dangerous as a template. The amulet's power was real. Publishing a detailed account of how 3 men murdered their father and briefly wielded that power might have served as inspiration rather than warning. Geirmund killed all 3 brothers and sealed them in separate locations with pieces of the amulet. Jarik went into Sarthal, the ancient first city of the Nords that was subsequently buried and became the excavation site of the College of Winterhold questline. Mikrul went into Folgunthur, a barrow west of Solitude near the coast. Sigdis went into Geirmund's Hall on a small island in Ivarstead's lake, which is how we know who built it. To complete the Galder amulet, to reassemble the pieces and restore the whole, you have to fight all 3 of them in their respective dungeons. And each of the brothers is distinct in a way that reflects what the centuries of sealed isolation have done to whoever they were before the murder. Jirik Galderson is sealed inside Sarthal, and the fight with him is one of the more complex magic encounters in the base game. He phases through immunity states, fire, frost, shock, cycling between them so that the effective weapon against him changes mid-combat. He uses powerful destruction magic with the particular fluency of someone who has had a very long time to practice the theory of it, if not the application. He is hard to approach. The fight rewards patience and adaptation. Mikrul Galdorsson fills Folgunthur with Draugr minions. He raises them from the barrow's dead, summoning what amounts to an army to stand between him and you, and he stays at range, commanding the engagement with the strategic patience of someone who understands that his greatest advantage is numbers rather than personal strength. He is the manager of the 3, the brother who thought in terms of leverage and force multiplication rather than direct power. Sigdis Galderson fights in Geirmund's Hall in the manner of a challenge. He creates copies of himself, identical in appearance, identical in movement, and you must determine during the combat which is the real one, and focus your attacks on it rather than wasting them on the phantoms. He is the most theatrical of the 3, the one whose style of fighting suggests a personality that valued deception and spectacle, who understood that confusion is its own kind of weapon. When all 3 are defeated, and all 3 pieces recovered, the assembled Galder amulet is one of the best items in the game. It grants significant bonuses to health, magicka, and stamina simultaneously, making it genuinely useful across character builds. But the mechanical value is almost incidental to the weight of carrying it. This is an object that was built by a man who was killed for it, whose sons killed each other's reputations and their own lives in acquiring its fragments, whose story was sealed by the government specifically so that no one would be inspired to repeat it. You carry it now, having done what Gehrman did, having tracked the sons to their sealed locations and defeated them and taken the pieces, and the amulet is yours. The sons are still in their dungeons. The game is not equipped to send them anywhere else. Jirik in Sarthal, Mikrul in Folgunthur, Sigdis in Gehrmun's hall, each in the chamber where their sealing concluded, each at rest in whatever sense the violently dead who cannot fully release their anchors are at rest. Goldor's story is one of the most human in a game full of gods and dragons and world-ending prophecies. It is the story of a man who built something extraordinary and was destroyed by the people closest to him for having built it. The legacy he was robbed of is now walking around in your inventory, and the sons who took it from him are back in the dark where Gehrman left them. Justice, in Skyrim, tends to come late and cost more than the original crime, but it does tend to come. Part 18. The Wandering Dead, and what Skyrim means by haunting. There is a quality of presence in Skyrim that is not the presence of an enemy and not the presence of an NPC, and not quite the presence of an atmospheric detail that belongs to its own category and rewards a particular kind of attention. Skyrim is haunted, not in the cheap sense where every dungeon has a ghost section and every ruin has a horror moment scripted for maximum startle. It is haunted in the older, more interesting sense. There are places in it where what happened persists in ways that the physical damage cannot fully account for, where the sense of the past is not just historical information, but something felt, and where that feeling has substance in the game world, as well as in the player's response to it. Hobbs Fall Cave is on the northern coast of Winterhold Hold, a sea cave used as a base by necromancers, cold and dark, in the particular way of a place where the sea wind has been getting in for centuries. The necromancers who use it are hostile and unremarkable by Skyrim standards. But in the cave's deepest chamber, there is a man in chains. He has been there a long time. He is not the kind of prisoner you can free. The game does not present him as a rescue objective. He is simply there, in his chains. And when you come in and deal with the necromancers and the cave is quiet, you can stand near him and understand, from the dungeon's notes and the spatial logic of what has been constructed around him, what the cave was originally for. It was a place of study, a specific kind of study, and the man in chains was the subject. And the necromancers who occupy it now are not the first to have used it for this purpose. The chains are very old. There is a version of Skyrim's haunting that is about history, the weight of events that occurred in a specific place, the residue of what the people who came before did or did not choose, layered in the physical fabric of the location. Sarthal is haunted this way. The entire ancient city, buried by the snow elves after the Night of Tears, is a physical record of one of the worst nights in Skyrim's founding history. The massacre that sent Isgramr back to Atmora, that eventually brought him back with 500 companions, and began the war that ended with the snow elves driven underground and transformed. Walking through the excavated chambers of Sarthal, knowing what it was before it was ruins, is not possible without that knowledge reshaping what the ruins mean. There is a version of Skyrim's haunting that is about the active persistence of the dead, the headless horseman on his route, the grieving giant standing vigil, the shades of ancient warriors still fighting wars that ended long before the Fourth Era. These presences are individual, specific, tied to what particular people or creatures experienced in particular moments. And there is a third version, which is the one I find most powerful and most specific to this game, which is the haunting of potential, the sense of a world that was going to be something, and is now the ruins of that intention. Irkingthand, the massive Dwemer ruin northeast of Whiterun, accessible through the Thieves' Guild questline, is haunted this way. It is enormous. Absurdly, almost offensively enormous, full of chambers and passages and mechanisms that go on far longer than any dungeon has any business going on, and all of it is empty of the people who built it. The Falmer who occupy it are there only because they were the next thing to arrive after the Dwemer disappeared, the way that plants grow in abandoned buildings, not because the buildings invited them, but because the building stopped doing the work of exclusion. Erkingthand was a city. It was a place where people made things and thought about how to make them better and argued about the best way to do things and had relationships with their neighbors and got up in the morning with specific intentions for the day. And then in a single moment, they were gone. All of them. Everywhere. And the city continued. The mechanisms ran, the lights stayed lit, the entire physical infrastructure of the civilization kept operating with the patient reliability of things built to last. But the people were gone. The haunting in Erkingthand, and in every Dwemer ruin, is the haunting of purpose without a purpose holder. Things kept doing the jobs they were designed to do. The centurions patrolled. The steam vents vented. The corridors remained corridors. And no one was there for any of it. The machine ran for 4,000 years in an empty building, doing exactly what it was built to do, and no one needed it to. There is a particularly human kind of sadness in that. In the faithfulness of built things to their original function, in the absence of anyone to receive what the faithfulness produces. Perhaps this is why so many players find Dwemer Ruins the most atmospheric of Skyrim's location types. Not because of the enemies, which are not particularly novel after the first few encounters, but because the whole place is doing something that makes sense in its own terms and makes a particular kind of sense in relation to absence. The Dwemer built a world, and the world kept running after they left. The lights are still on, the machines are still running, nobody's home. This is the deepest form of haunting Skyrim offers. Not a ghost on a road, or a shade in a tomb, or a spirit bound to an object, but a world still doing the work of a civilization that is no longer there to use it. Every Dwemer ruin is a city on the day after everyone left. The persistence of function without inhabitants is its own kind of presence. The most accurate definition of haunting might not be the presence of the dead, but the presence of everything built for the living, after the living are gone. Skyrim is full of this. The Nordic burial mounds with their whale oil lanterns still burning. The Dwemer machines still patrolling corridors for threats the Dwemer are no longer alive to care about. The ancient word walls still carving their silent messages in a dead language toward a sky they cannot see. The Greybeards in High Hrothgar, still practicing the restraint that Jurgen Windcaller mandated centuries ago, still treating the Thu'um with the respect it deserves in an era when most people have forgotten the Thu'um exists. The whole province is waiting for something, not impatiently, not urgently, simply persisting in the specific way that worlds persist when no one has told them to stop, with the same faithfulness that characterizes everything we have talked about tonight. All those creatures and warriors and spirits and sleeping dragons, all of them still in the positions they were in when whatever ended, ended. Faithful, past the point of practical sense, past the point of reward, just there, still there, supplemental. The sounds of Skyrim's silence, and why we keep returning. There is a question that people who love Skyrim tend to encounter eventually, usually from someone who does not, which is, why do you keep going back? It is a fair question. The main quest is finite. The faction quest lines complete. The dungeons, after enough playthroughs, become familiar in their layouts and their rhythms. The dragons that once felt like catastrophes become navigable obstacles. The game's systems, which once felt mysterious, become transparent. You know what a skill does, you know how enchanting works. You know that the Forsworn in a camp will be hostile, and the ones in the market will not. The world's surfaces have been fully learned, and yet people go back, not because of achievement hunting or completionist logic, though those exist too, but because Skyrim has a quality that is harder to name than any of its systems, or quests, or lore. It has a particular quality of silence, not literal silence. The game has an exceptional score by Jeremy Soule, orchestral and atmospheric, that remains one of the most effective pieces of video game music ever composed for the purposes of making a player feel that they are somewhere real and enormous and worth being in. The music fills the space in a way that does not crowd it. It makes the mountains feel taller. It makes the night feel more like night. It does the job that all great background music does, which is to exist in the space between the player and the experience and make the experience more fully itself, without calling attention to the mechanism by which this is happening. But the silence I mean is the silence between events. The silence of walking a road in Skyrim when nothing in particular is happening. The specific quality of the snowfields in the pale when the weather clears and the light comes in low and flat from the east, and everything is white and blue, and the sound of your footsteps on the snow is the only thing in earshot. The silence of a dungeon after the last enemy has been cleared, when you are simply walking through the now safe space, reading the books on the shelves, and looking at the crafting tools on the tables, and trying to understand who lived here and what they were doing before whatever ended it. Skyrim makes space for this silence in a way that not all games do. Its pacing allows for long stretches of atmospheric exploration between combat encounters. Its visual design creates places that reward looking at, not because they are spectacular, though some are, but because they are specific, particular, the way a place is specific and particular when someone has thought carefully about what kind of place it should be. The Rift in autumn, with its orange leaves and its mushrooms and the warm light coming through the canopy. The Reach in winter, with its red rock faces and its high, exposed ridgelines, and the forsworn camps like orange fires against the gray. Markarth in the early morning, when the stone city catches the light, and the waterfalls are still running, and the sound of the falls is the first thing you hear when the load screen clears. These are places that hold something, not just content, not just enemies and loot and quest givers. They hold character. The character of a world that was built with enough care and specificity that even the parts without quests attached to them feel like they matter. And the hidden encounters we have been talking about all night are the deepest expression of this philosophy. They are the places where the game committed to building something real, in a location where no one was required to notice it. The developers did not have to put Volthuriol in Blackreach. They did not have to make him awaken only to the shout aimed at a specific lamp. They did not have to give him a name in Dove Azul that means something. They did not have to make the grieving giant non-hostile unless attacked, did not have to build the mourning into his AI behavior, did not have to put him near a dead mammoth instead of just wandering. They chose to do these things. Not because a game mechanic required it, but because the world they were building required it. Because a world that does not have things like this in it is not a world. It is a set. Skyrim is not a set. It is something that passes, in the particular way that sufficiently dense and careful fiction can pass, for a real place. Not real in the way that pretends you might visit it if you took the right turning. Real in the way that it has the texture of reality, the specific gravity of a world where things happen independently, of whether they are observed, where the past is actually in the past and not just in the dialogue, where a giant standing over a dead mammoth is doing it, because that is what the character of the world produces in that circumstance. Not because a designer was trying to make you feel something. This is why people keep returning, not for the content. The content has been consumed, for the silence between the content. For the walk through a province that was made with sufficient care, that even on the 100th crossing, it still produces the feeling of being somewhere cold and old and enormous and full, right at the edge of visibility, with things that are faithful past the point of practical sense. Sleeping in the dark, waiting for a shout. A final word before sleep, the fire has gone low. That particular low it reaches when the main fuel is gone, and what remains is coals, steady, red-orange, reliable, in a different way than the early blaze. You can feel the temperature in the room has settled rather than dropped. The night has found its level. We have been in Skyrim together for a long while now, longer than most people stay. Through all 12 proper sections, through the additional encounters, through the supplemental reflections, through the ancient crypts and the frozen coastlines and the impossible underground city and the gray plain of stolen souls, through the last stands and the faithfulnesses and the absences that are somehow more present than most presences. If you are still with me, if you made it this far through the dark, I want you to know that this is exactly the kind of attention these things deserve. The hidden encounters of Skyrim were put there for people with exactly this quality of patience. People who walk past the obvious path and take the other one. People who shout at ceiling lamps to see what happens. People who follow horsemen at night to see where they go. The game was built for you. The developers who put Volthuriol in Blackreach knew somewhere that someone would find him. The ones who placed the grieving giant knew someone would choose to walk away. The ones who built Volskiga at the very edge of the world's northern coast knew someone would walk to the edge and keep going. This is what games do when they are made with real love. They leave things in the corners for the people who check corners. They trust that those people exist. They build the world as though it deserves to be complete, even when no one is watching. Skyrim is that game. It has been that game for longer than most games exist. It will probably continue to be that game for longer than we can currently predict. The province is still there. The secrets are still in it. Volthuriol is coiled around his lamp. The Pale Lady is at rest in her forest. Karstag is somewhere beneath the ice of his coastal promontory. The twin dragons are in their lake. The Ebony Warrior is at the last vigil. All of them waiting, patient as the dark itself. Sleep well. The fire knows what it is doing. And wherever you are watching from tonight, whatever time it is, whatever the sky looks like outside your window, thank you for being the kind of person who spends 150 minutes walking through a world like this. Subscribe if this is the kind of night you want more of. The world has more corners. We will walk them together.